And we're live. Mike Sermich, dangerplay.com, Gorilla Mindset, the Shariah Law mindset. Maybe I said that right. Maybe I didn't. Don't really care. But after a long-awaited time, finally, my good friend Nabil Aziz is live, and he's Muslim, but he's not going to be triggered. So if you have mean questions, any mean question you've ever wanted to ask a Muslim, he's not going to say. Maybe I didn't. Don't really care. But after a long. Hold on. We got a back echo. There's an echo. There's an echo in here. So yeah, he's not going to cry. He's not going to say, "How dare you insult the beautiful religion of Islam." He's just going to say, "Hey man, I'm a grown man. I'm an adult. You can be as mad at me as you want. Don't really care." And that's kind of why we're doing the conversation, because I'm definitely tired of crybabies on both sides. I'm tired of people who say, "Cernovich, you can't have this guy on your show. You're giving a platform to Muslims." And I'm like, dude, do you not know what I'm about? I'm all about, if this guy can convince you and convert you to Islam, then that's your fault, man. That's the way I look at it. How dare I give anybody a platform? Hey, man, this is all on you. So if you're on Periscope, real quick, I'm going to show you who we're talking to. You should probably watch it on YouTube. Click on YouTube. So Nabil, go ahead, maybe introduce yourself, tell people what you're about, and then we'll get to some questions.
All right, so my name is Nabil Aziz from Dubai, where I live with my family, and I am the founder of Becoming the Alpha Muslim, which is a self-improvement website for Muslim men. And my day job is that I am a copywriter and content strategist. And I've been following Mike and Danger and Play for about, I think, over a year, maybe a year and a half now, and finally got on his radar. This is my 60 minutes, basically.
Yeah, so I've known Nabil before all the internet drama about Muslims and everybody. Because here's what a lot of people don't really understand is and this is what we're going to kind of talk about, is I've never come out as anti-Islam per se. I've come out against a lot of the backwards values maybe that a lot of people have. So it's more complicated, but a lot of you, you said you had a lot of questions for him. So here's kind of the way I'm going to run. Here's how I'm going to kind of run this event, so to speak. Not really run it. That sounds really douchey. Here's the way we're going to do it. We have a bunch of questions from you, for Nabil, and we're going to ask him these questions. I'm not going to argue with them. I'm not going to, I'm going to do more of a Rubin Report style interview, which really pisses a lot of people off, because they're like, well, when he said this, why didn't you push back? And when he said that, why didn't you tell him it's wrong? Because that's not really my job. My job is that we have hundreds of questions, probably more than we could ever get to. And we're going to just go ask these questions one by one, let him answer it. And then if you think he sounds great, then hey, that's your decision. If you think he sounds terrible, that's your decision too. But this is more about free speech and because what I like about Nabil is, Nabil's always saying, Dave Rubin, you always have Muslims on who are anti-Islam. Why don't you have on some pro-Islam Muslims? And that, as much as I like Dave Rubin, none of us are perfect. And I think that's kind of a fair critique, which is, let's have both sides on. So I guess we'll just start kind of broad, Nabil. What do you think about these march against Sharia that's going on today?
I haven't been following it very closely since I've been taking a sort of a break from social media, except for a little bit of time that I spent since it's Ramadan and we're a bit busy with fasting and stuff like that. But I mean, I can understand the sentiment of these people with the spate of recent attacks. I mean, England has had 3 attacks in 75 days, and America had how many? Like three attacks last year during the presidential race. So it's all just, come to a head. And then we have some. There is a significant section of American Muslims who have an alliance with the liberals and leftists, and that really doesn't help situations much either. So I guess it's just inevitable. It seems, it seems like there are a few people there who are just using it to further their own anti-Muslim agendas. And obviously the people who are coming out in support, they have, legitimate concerns. That's one of the reasons why I want to have as much dialogue as possible, because there are legitimate concerns, and we can't just block our way to the solution.
So you live in, you said Dubai, right?
Yeah.
Did
I
you
used to
grow
live in
up-
Chicago. I used to live in Chicago for about 6 years. Before that, I'm Sri Lankan, born and raised.
Okay, so you were born and raised in Sri Lanka, then you lived in Chicago, and then you're back in Dubai, and you're doing kind of your online business stuff. But you told me earlier you couldn't do the video until now because you had prayer. So you're an adherent Muslim?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was, when you messaged me, it was time for the night prayer. And then after the obligatory night prayer, there are extra Ramadan prayers, which I sort of skipped to come to this interview because those are not obligatory.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think you kept track of a few of the questions. I have a few questions too. You ready to just get to it, get started?
Yeah, you can fire away, dude.
Perfect. Okay, first question comes from Red Pill Babe. Why don't more moderate Muslims speak out condemning Islamic terrorist attacks?
They do. Just after the most recent attack in the UK, there was a statement by 130 imams in England condemning the attack and saying that they would not pray the funeral prayer for the attackers who were killed, and they would not be buried in a Muslim cemetery. And that's a very, very significant statement, because to deny a Muslim his last rites is it's a severe condemnation. Before that, there was a letter to Baghdadi, Baghdadi.com. It was like 120 Islamic scholars came out in condemnation of ISIS. There is a Muslim lady on Twitter who made a website called muslimscondemn.com. I'll find the link for you guys, where it basically collates every single condemnation by Muslims towards terrorist attacks. And there are hundreds and hundreds of entries there. It's being updated all day. So Muslims are condemning terrorism.
You know, to me, that's always been a tricky question, because I always get told I have to disavow every moron and idiot that I don't even like or have anything to do with. So I've always been, in a way, like, again, my job isn't to attack you. It's not to white knight for you. It's just to let you talk. But to me, I've been in both situations where, for example, that Portland guy, some guy in Portland who was a Bernie guy, but then he claimed he was a Nazi, and then he claimed it was this. He went and tried to attack a couple of Muslim women, and then he stabbed two guys who defended him. And my take on this guy's a moron, right? And so I think the reason a lot of people ask that question is because, at least in the West and in America, everybody like me, we have to say something about that, you know, that idiot in Portland, this completely bullshit and completely unfair. And then we're saying, well, you should have to disavow it too. So I see that as a lot of one of the reasons people are so divided, because of the double standards. If I have to disavow every idiot that I don't even like, and that don't like me, and that I said I don't like 20 times every time an idiot does something, then the Muslim should have to disavow terrorism too. In truth, I don't think anybody should have to disavow anybody unless you're connected to them. But those are kind of the rules of the game, and that's where that question kind of comes from.
Yeah, I mean, they've created this rule set of, you know, disavowing. Now everybody's subject to that rule set, and you guys did it with Reza Aslan like a day ago, or I mean a few days ago, and he ended up getting canceled from his CNN thing as well. So I mean, those are the I guess those are the rules of the game now. So everybody's got to play, right?
Yeah, so we got Reza gone, we got Kathy Griffin gone. Yeah, and we're taking scalps, and in truth, we just kind of want everybody to be able to have open conversations without being a baby. Because one thing I've noticed about you is that you take a lot of flack. You and, what is her name, Queen Sherry? I forget her name right now, but she's more of a liberal feminist Muslim.
Shireen?
What was her name again? So
Shireen Qudusi?
Yeah. So
so she's the opposite end of me, and we both basically just give each other shit.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting that even within Islam, there are reform Muslims, there are feminist Muslims, there are people who are saying you can't be a feminist Muslim, but there's all this diversity of thought within it. But if you watch the media, you learn one or two things about Muslims. Either you're being committed hate crimes against you and everybody hates you and isn't it so unfair, or you're blowing things up. That's it, right? In the media, there's no middle ground. Hey, we're actually normal people living our lives, running our businesses, having debate. We don't agree on everything. It's either you're victims. Isn't it terrible that the white Nazis like Cernovich are going around attacking women in hijabs? Or like, look at these terrorists, this is terrible. And that I think says a lot about the fake news media in America and in all the West.
And most of those are hoaxes. Last year, what happened after the election, so many of those were like Muslims hoaxing. And there was a Muslim who hoaxed during Ramadan when he's supposed to be more religious.
Yeah. Right. And that's because in America, people do kind of respond to incentives. And in America, the best thing you can be now, the highest aspiration is if you can somehow be a victim.
Victim,
that's the goal. So we got a few more. Well, yeah, we got a lot of questions. We'll be here for a while. Sean is actually getting me a cold brew coffee. But this one I think is kind of funny. When will his Islamic flag fly over Londonistan?
That's coming soon. I think the demographics are changing by 2070. So London will be a majority Muslim country by that time. And Tommy Robinson's kids are going to probably marry a Muslim man.
Yeah, that's what I've been telling people too, is that the demographic replacement in Europe is happening. Scott Adams even joked, which is that the first Muslim nation to be a nuclear power will probably be France. So either France or Germany will be the first Muslim nation. And
yeah, that's funny, but it's actually factually incorrect since Pakistan has nukes.
Yeah, I know, but a joke's a joke. Major Western nuclear power, yeah. Yeah, it's a joke. And of course we could get into Pakistan and what people think about. Because here's what I thought was funny is when I was in Jordan and I was talking to Palestinians in Jordan, they hate the Saudis and they claim the Saudis aren't real Muslims. And I know you have to be careful what you say because of all the restrictions and everything. But that's what I've always found funny is because I talk to everybody. I talk to the Nazis, the Muslims, the Christians, you name it, the Jews, the rednecks, the blacks, the African Americans, the black nationalists. I don't really care. I just talk to people non-judgmentally. And when you do that, you find out that there's a lot of Muslims who hate Saudi Arabia with a passion. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia has a very unique position in the Muslim world in that since Mecca and Medina, which are the two holiest sites in Islam, are within that country, they are held to a higher standard, so they're not allowed to make the mistakes that other countries are allowed to make. That being said, I'm sure you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Mm-hmm. And in that book, the author, Scott Perkins, he describes in detail the relationship between the Saud family, which is the ruling monarchy in Saudi Arabia, and the American government. So that is one of the reasons why there is so much animosity towards Saudi Arabia in the Muslim world, is because of their relationship with these foreign powers, and that applies to most of the Muslim governments in the Muslim world that have these relationships. So a lot of the problems that you see in the Muslim world are because of due in part to the support of these dictatorships and despotic rulers that are supported by Western governments in order to maintain the status quo and safeguard Western interests in this region.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's the vibe I got. They even told me how they like the rich Saudi royalty. What they'll do is because it's not technically, you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. They'll find these young, beautiful, Arab girls, over 18 guys. Young doesn't mean 12 years old. We'll get to that later. But then they'll marry them, deflower them. Then they'll get an imam to give them a divorce like a month later after they're done having their fun with them. And they said there's all kinds of shady things like that happen in Saudi Arabia that we never hear about the West because the Saudis do have so much power over American media.
Yeah, that happens. It's happened more since the Syrian conflict started happening and there were a lot of refugees. So these guys were traveling to the refugee camps, and these people are desperate and they take advantage of them. So that's what's been going on, basically. I mean, it's a sad situation, but you know, that's what it is, basically. And I mean, Saudis, I mean, good Saudi Muslims are the best Muslims on the face of the earth, and the bad Saudi Muslims are probably the worst human beings on the face of the earth. There's no middle between them.
Yeah, I noticed that. The only time I lost a poll was and that's the thing. I'm glad we're having this conversation, because there's so many misunderstandings going on right now because of the fake news media. And the only time I ever got beat by in a poll. So I posted a question: who has more terrorists, Russia or Saudi Arabia? And anytime I have a poll, I can get the results I want, no problem. And I lost the poll, and I go, how did I lose this poll, man? And I found out there's a whole subculture called Saudi Arabia Twitter. Yeah. And so the Saudis that you mentioned, the good Saudis, are active on Twitter because they don't have any free speech in real life. So on Twitter, there's this whole just like in America, we have Black Twitter. On Twitter, there's Saudi Arabia Twitter. And actually, so I even said I want to see the frogs go to war with the Saudi Twitter, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Mobile phone penetration is like 200% in the Middle East, so especially in the Gulf countries. So they're all on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, very, very active on social media. And if anybody knows Arabic, they have an insight into a completely different world if they just follow some of these Twitter accounts.
Now, so some more questions. One guy goes, why do we need any Muslims at all in the U.S.?
You don't. They would be better off living in Muslim countries. I mean, seriously. But there are Muslims there already. What are you going to do? You're going to gas them all, or you're going to let them live according to your sort of constitution or whatever it is? They have the right to live there. I am, as a conservative Muslim, I don't believe it is a good idea for Muslims to live in Western countries. They would be better off living in Muslim countries. However, there are Muslims there right now. You just have to figure out a way to live with them. I mean, if you don't want more Muslims coming in, build the wall.
So why is it that you think Muslims would be better off living outside of the Western world?
Because it's better for their religion. They're able to practice their religion more freely. There are a lot of commandments of Islam that are not. They are not able to practice them to their full ability because of the laws and regulations in the Western countries that they live in. So, for example, the alms giving called zakat in Islam. There's no infrastructure for them to pay that, and that's an obligation in their religion. If a Muslim man wants to marry more than one wife, it's illegal in most countries. But however, it's not illegal to have as many side pieces as you want. So that's a that's a workaround. So I mean, it's just in general, it's better for their religion to be in a Muslim country where they can. The mosques are everywhere. They can hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. Fridays are off. They can go to the Friday prayers and things, Friday mass and things like that. So that's and the world views are completely different. The way a Muslim thinks, if he's an observant Muslim, is completely different to the way a non-Muslim thinks. So there's always going to be that clash of ideologies. In what way do you think a Muslim and a non-Muslim have completely different ways of viewing the world and thinking about the world? Okay, I mean, it depends on whether or not the non-Muslim is a religious person or not, but ultimately it's God first. So the Muslim's perspective, his mindset is, how do I look at this from an Islamic perspective? So he's got always those Islam tinted glasses on, and that's how he views the world. That's how he navigates the world. Anything that happens to him, he'll view it through that lens. And I mean, that may or may not be the same as how a non-Muslim would look at it, especially if they're not religious. So they have different worldviews. So in other words, you think that in a way you sound a lot to me like a nationalist, which is that Muslims would be better off in Muslim countries, Christians in Christian countries, and
it's easier for everybody to practice their religion, it's actually would lead to probably more peace in the world.
I mean, yeah, that would be the probably the best solution. And in fact, in our religion, it is not recommended that a Muslim live in a non-Muslim country, and it's better off for him to migrate back to a Muslim country. And the only reason why he's able to live in a Muslim country is if he's able to openly practice his religion without persecution. And as long as Muslims have that in Western countries, they're allowed to live there. But still, it's better for them, religion-wise, to live in a Muslim country. And I mean, diversity plus proximity equals conflict, right? So anytime you get people with different worldviews who are unable to have a civil discussion and come to a civil agreement on how to live together, there's going to be problems. So to a certain extent, I can sympathize with the ideas that have been becoming more and more popular within the right in terms of nationalism and things like that.
Yeah, that was it's a great point that you touch upon, which is that there's an issue of, if you're Muslim, you want to live in a Muslim nation, and that's why the Saudi Arabians are funding mosques in Europe, because ultimately they're resettling Europe, and they will try to convert these nations into more Muslims. Would that be fair to say? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Would it be fair to say that if millions of Muslims move into Europe or even in the U.S., they are going to want to have a Muslim nation?
I don't know if they would want to have a Muslim nation in the sense of a Sharia state. I do believe that they would want the freedom to practice their religion openly, and that would entail a number of compromises on the part of the host nation in terms of allowing them to build mosques and excuse me, in terms of allowing them to build mosques and things like that, and not persecuting Muslim women from wearing the veil, and that will cause some friction with the host country. And I mean, the more and more Muslims you have, the more and more they're going to want facilitations for them to be able to practice their religion. So if you don't want that to happen, then you shouldn't have as many Muslims in those countries.
Yeah, in a way, to me, that it makes sense, because in America, a lot of our holidays, for example, in America, everything would be closed on Sunday. Why? Well, because Christians founded America, and they wanted to create legal structures and morals that were consistent with more of a Christian worldview, and that's why you have an oath under God.
Yeah.
So things like, so to me, it seems a little, it seems a little unfair to be surprised that people who practice their religion are going to go into an area, and then people are shocked to learn, wait a minute, they want to actually practice their religion? I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem, and that's why I believe that religiously observant Muslims have more in common with the Christians in the Western countries than they do with liberals and leftists, because there is a sort of war against. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but they call it the war against Christianity. So there are similar problems that religiously observant Christians are facing in Western countries in order to be able to observe their faith without ridicule. It's like that that couple who had the bakery that refused to bake the wedding cake for the gay couple. They got into a lot of trouble for that, and those are their religious beliefs. So I believe that we have more in common with the Christians in Western countries than we do with secular liberals.
One of the interesting things I've always found are that you would think that a lot of the people on the internet who are misogynists would be pro-Muslim, because I always kind of joke, and this makes people angry. I go, as a man, I see a lot of upsides. I can be okay with the patriarchy, because it is a patriarchal society.
Yeah, I mean, it is a the Muslim countries are patriarchal. I don't know if I would say that Islam is a patriarchal religion. It does have a lot of those flavors in the sense that women are sort of under the authority of the fathers and the husbands in their families. So in that sense, it is patriarchal, and women don't have the same rights as women do in non-Muslim countries.
Well, I had an interesting conversation again. It was with a Muslim, and he had a girlfriend, but he couldn't tell his mom. And I go, what are you talking about? He said, well, actually, your mom sets up relationships. So in a sense, there's that patriarchal aspect. But if you're a young man and you want to get married or have a serious relationship, you're not allowed to just go to the club and meet a girl. You got to arrange it through the women. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hoeing that goes around among the young Muslims, men and women. But when it comes down to marriage, it's usually the parents will find somebody for the child.
Now, why is it that people say there's no such thing as moderate Islam?
There's no such thing as moderate Islam, because moderate Islam is is a Muslim that follows all of the teachings of Islam without going to extremes. I mean, I'm not the best Muslim, but I would be the example of a moderate Muslim, and I'm an Islamist. So the moderate Muslim is somebody who actually follows all of the teachings of Islam, and that would not be considered moderate in a Western context. So those are the moderate Muslims, the ones who follow the religion to a T. And the extremists are the ones who are not religiously observant, or the terrorists like ISIS. So those extremes are two sides of the same coin. You have people who are negligent and people who go to religious extremes. And the moderates are the ones who actually follow the religion in its entirety, which you in the West would call an Islamist.
So in other words, Ramadan, closing things at certain times, calls to prayer in the streets. Those are the kind of things that would be an example of moderate Islam, because that's people practicing their religion. But yeah, the terrorism and the jihad is something completely different. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean the terrorism that exists with ISIS and Al Qaeda is an example of religious extremism. Jihad is another issue. We have jihad in Islam, and that is not something that's considered extreme. It's just the application of this teaching, which people take to extremes, and you see things like ISIS and Al Qaeda and Taliban happening.
Now, so I guess the question then would be, people like to blame Islam and terrorism together. What's your response to that?
I mean, if you add up all of the Muslim terrorists in the world, and you can take the the liberal estimates of the total number of terrorists in the world, and compare it to the total population of Muslims, you come up with, I believe, 0.004%. So 99.996% of Muslims in the world are, not terrorists, just regular people living their lives. The problem is that there are teachings in Islam which can be misinterpreted by terrorists and used for those ends. And the victims, I mean, even though the probability is small, the percentage of terrorists are small, people are fragile to terrorism. So a terrorist event is actually, what they call a black swan event. So the effect on the psyche is much more magnified than, say, a drone attack that kills a bunch of civilians, because it's not visceral. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so by the way, for those of you just tuning in, if you're on Periscope, you definitely want to click over to the link on YouTube. It's better quality. So I'm reading the comments on YouTube. Why is Mike being such a cuck with this guy? Look, guys, so if you're just tuning in, I'm asking your question. So if you want to ask anything that you've ever wanted to ask a Muslim, go ahead and I'll ask the question. But I'm here to facilitate a conversation. I'm not here to have some heated debate on Islam, because my views on Islam are a lot different than what people expect. People expect me to just think, oh, I hate it and it must be bad and everything. But there's way more to it than that. And a lot of the problems people have are that, again, as I said earlier, you can only have two opinions on Muslims. Either they're completely oppressed and everybody who disagrees with them is an Islamophobe and is an evil person and is a Nazi, or they're terrorists. That's what I hate about the fake news media. That's what I hate about conversation today is you have to either say every Muslim's a victim, and if you disagree with a Muslim, you must be an Islamophobe and you're a bad person, or you got to say they're terrorists. But what about the middle group? There's 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide. And the idea that going around and saying I hate all Muslims is going to do anything to further anything great about the world is a big problem. So here's a fair question. They go, please ask him to explain about, I can't pronounce it, Taqiyya, but I guess
Taqiyya.
Yeah. So that's the argument. People say that under your religion you're allowed to lie to non-believers. Is that a thing? Is that true?
Okay, so Taqiyya is actually something that's in the Quran, and it is the allowance for a Muslim who is under pain of death or under extreme duress, or for him to be able to lie about his faith. So basically, it's a gun to your head. You're allowed to say something that would, save your life. That's the actual application of Taqiyya. So it has nothing to do with our general conversation today, because lying is a major sin in Islam. It's only under these extreme circumstances. For example, if Mike Cernovich put a gun to Nabil's head and said, "Listen, you need to renounce your religion, or I'm going to put a bullet in your head," then I'm allowed to do what you say to preserve my life. That is the actual application of Taqiyya. There is another kind of deception that we are allowed, and that's basically psyops. In a context of war. I mean, I'm not at war with Mike Cernovich, so there's no reason for me to do any psyops on him.
Well, maybe you are at war. And if you were, because if you were running a psyop on me right now, that's exactly what you would say. And that's why my answer to everybody watching is: you believe him or don't believe him, right? That's the whole point: is believe him or don't believe him. I'm not here to change anybody's minds. It's just that in America and in the West, we're not allowed to. Imagine he was on a CNN panel, and I said, "Well, how do you answer this accusation that all Muslims are terrorists?" You're not allowed to have those kind of conversations in the fake news media. Yeah. And the reason I'm here is to have conversations you can't have anywhere else. And I think a lot of ways, there's a lot of Muslims who they want to go on the victim circuit. They want to go on and say, "Oh my God, I'm so oppressed. This is so terrible. Everybody's so mean to me." And what I've always respected about Nabil is if you call him a savage, child bride, whatever, he's not going to cry and screen cap and say, "This is the abuse we have to deal with." He just says, "Fuck you," or whatever, you're a troll, or keep trolling, or whatever. So that's why I've gotten along just fine with him. We've had a lot of great conversations. So those of you watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button. We got a lot of downvotes. Hey man, don't downvote because you don't like Muslims or you disagree with Nabil. Like it because you're glad we can have these conversations where you can troll this guy all you want and he's not going to cry about it, and we can ask him anything we want to do. To me, that's what we need more of, because I'm tired of the same basic bitch conversations of all Muslims are terrorists, how do we eradicate terrorism, or all Muslims are victims and isn't it so sad how we mistreat them. Those are extreme positions on either side.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to sort of show my appreciation and thank you for facilitating this conversation, because I get a lot of flack for my relationship to you in the Muslim community, and my statement to them is like, you guys don't know his actual beliefs on Islam and Muslims. They're much more moderate than you think. So I'm really appreciative of you facilitating these conversations. And for the past year, I've been trying to get people's attention. People like Rubin Report, people like Gad Saad, and all of these people, not to promote my own brand, but to put them in touch with people in America who can have these conversations with them. There are so many Islamic scholars who can hold a decent conversation with these people on issues of Islam and answer the very difficult questions that the fake news media are not going to answer. because they have an agenda to push as well. Instead, we have, you know, people like Rubin Report, and I really appreciate the, you know, the work that he does. But on the issue of Islam, he has a very clear bias in who he interviews, and we've been trying to point that out. There are so many people in America that we can put them in touch with to have these conversations, but it seems like they're not interested.
Yeah, again, because everything kind of falls into one of these extremes where you can go on CNN and create a hate crime hoax and you're a hero, or you can talk about how Islam is terrorism. And to me, I'm more interested in the real conversations, which is, and again, I get in a lot of trouble. I get in a lot of trouble with my own people because they expect me to hate. They expect me to hate Islam. They expect me to hate Islam, and when they find out I don't, then, you know, they start mean message boards and everything on me. But again, I don't see. Here's the way I look at it: a vision for the world of prosperity, peace for people. I don't see how telling 1.5 billion people in the world that I hate them, I don't see how that is moving the ball forward. I think we have to figure out what is going on. And in my view, quite frankly, is even though I'm a pro-man guy and I write about men's issues, and in America, feminism is oppressing men, I think a lot of these problems with jihadi are more issues of young men who have anger management problems and weren't properly raised, and they live in a culture where people tell them to be victims and tell them to feel oppressed, and then they kind of lash out. So I view a lot of terrorism as having as much to do with, like, for example, mass shootings are always done by men. Great inventions by men. So there's something about the male brain that causes us to create great things. But if you don't have a proper outlet for masculinity and a proper outlet for men, then they act out in really terrible ways, which is what we see. So I see that as, you know, I'm not, you know, giving Muslims a pass at all, but I see that as also being an issue we have to talk about. Polygamy, and how in the Middle Eastern world, a lot of men are completely shut out from relationships with women. So what's your take on this? What are some of the causes of radical Islamic terrorism? And is it okay to call it radical Islamic terrorism, or should we not call it radical Islamic terrorism at all?
Yeah, I mean, you can, I guess you can call it radical Islamic terrorism. It's just, I mean, you can call it that because the sort of liberal SJW Muslims take so much offense to it and get triggered by it. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, these terrorists are Muslims, and they're acting. They believe that they're acting in accordance with Islam. Whether or not that's true, that's correct or not, is another issue. So you can call it, I mean, I get, you can call it radical Islamic terrorism if you want to. I don't know if, you know, the terrorism issue is a lot more complicated than people would like it to be. The problem is that we have, you know, humans, they like to reduce complex issues into, you know, things that are very black and white because it's cognitively easier for them to process. So whenever you have a terrorist attack, oh no, it must be the Quran that is the problem here, rather than socio-political situations that have been going on for the past, you know, 50 to 100 years. I mean, I'll bring up Confessions of an Economic Hitman again. Don't underestimate the effect that these relationships that, you know, Muslim rulers have with Western powers, don't underestimate the effect that it has on the Muslim populace, because these people are, you know, they are despotic rulers, and they crush dissent. They are not, you know, for things like human rights. And when you do find situations where the people rise up to express their will, like for example in the Arab Spring in Egypt, when you give them democracy, they vote for, look at who they vote for. They vote for Erdogan. They vote for Mohammed Morsi. And when they do vote for those people, what happens? The deep state, and you guys are very familiar with the deep state now because they've been sabotaging you since November. The deep state comes in and gets rid of them and puts things back to the way they were. Now, when you have those situations, and these have been going on for the past, you know, 50, 60, 70, maybe 100 years or so, there is a profound impact that it has on the populace. And in order to maintain the security of the society, they crush all kinds of dissent, and as a result, we don't have the open marketplace of ideas going on. So extremist beliefs, what happens is they go underground. When they go underground, you have no way to engage those ideas and correct them and guide people away from extremism. So it goes underground. It's just going to fester and fester, and then ultimately you get terrorism.
Well, what's interesting is that, you know, again, a lot of the comments are just people, why aren't you being mean? Why aren't you being mean? I'm reading also kind of on Twitter with Antifa. I don't think the Antifa terrorism in America is coming from Islam. I think that is the terrorism that we're suffering at the hands of Antifa, far left terrorism. I don't see Islam having anything to do with that. There were anarchists in early American history in the 1900s who were bombing things. Sacco and Vizzini, even though they were probably innocent, that they were part of, you know, bomb attacks with terrorism. The IRA, the Irish Republican, there's been terrorism throughout human history in all kinds of forms. And again, for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm okay. If you guys want to blame Muslims, I'm not going to call you an Islamophobe, and I'm not going to be triggered by it. But we have to contextualize all terrorism, the terrorism that's happening today, with everything that has happened throughout the world, because that's just called having a complex worldview and understanding. It is sort of a complicated world. And the answer is, a lot of these things, I'm not exactly sure. If you go, what's the cause of terrorism? Then I would say deep state wants it, actually. They orchestrated it. The CIA funded bin Laden. The CIA and the Saudis funded bin Laden. But we never talk about Saudi Arabia. So in my world, people get triggered because I'm talking to a Muslim. In my world, I'm triggered that all of you don't know that deep state funds terrorism, that Saudi Arabia funds terrorism, that on 9/11, when 9/11 happened, the Bush family, which had business, and the Carlyle Group, which had business with the Saudis, let them all get out of the country early and run and hide. But we never talk about Saudi Arabia and America. We're supposed to talk about Iran. So even though none of the terrorists that we've had in America have been Iranians, they've all been Saudis, they're funded by Saudis, nobody wants to talk about that. So to me, blindly hating Muslims without talking about Saudi Arabia is a definition of a sheep, and it's actually quite embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. After all of that, shit talking on the campaign, getting on Twitter fights with Al-Walid bin Talal and all of that stuff. After all of that happened, did he have a choice? I mean, he had to go. It wasn't his choice. He had to go. And then it's because the interests are too intertwined. There's no way you're going to have the Saudi state and the U.S. interests separated now. They made sure of that after the oil embargo in the 70s. They made sure that there's no way you can have a Saudi state without U.S. propping it up. So I mean, everything is connected, and it's just if people would let their memories go a little bit further back than 9/11, because that's what it seems like. It seems like all of history started on 9/11. If people would just let their memories go a little bit further back and try to understand the context behind these things, I believe we'd have a much more productive conversation on issues of terrorism, and we can actually, get somewhere with this situation. Okay,
so then I guess the two questions we'll have is, one would be, what is Sharia law? Are you pro-Sharia law? And then your take on female genital mutilation.
Yeah, okay, so every observant Muslim is pro-Sharia law because Sharia law is how they practice their religion. The 5 daily prayers that we pray is Sharia law. The way we wash ourselves before going to pray is Sharia law. Fasting during Ramadan is Sharia law. The overwhelming majority of Sharia law is our religious obligations. And people generally fixate on a few aspects, maybe around 6% of the Sharia law that deals with capital punishment, rules of engagement during warfare, and things like that. So people are fixating on an aspect of Sharia law that has a very minor scope in the context of a Muslim's life, whereas the majority of Sharia law is people's obligations to their God and people's obligations to other human beings. Female genital mutilation. So female genital mutilation, I believe the World Health Organization defines it as clitoral excision, which is the complete removal of the clitoris, labia, and the surrounding areas. This is not allowed in Islam. What Islam allows is a procedure called the clitoridotomy, or a clitoral hoodectomy. And a lot of non-Muslim women undergo this procedure as cosmetic surgery to have their clitoral heads, clitoral hoods reduced or removed, because it enables them to have better clitoral orgasms. So what is prescribed in Islam is something that allows a woman to have more sexual pleasure rather than completely removing her ability to experience sexual pleasure entirely. So there's a huge misunderstanding there. And the problem I see is people don't even want to hear that there is a difference, when there is clearly, because you have it in your own medical terminology and it's a cosmetic procedure, that there is a clear difference between female genital mutilation and a clitoridotomy, which what we call female circumcision is in Islam.
Yeah, that's again an issue that is interesting. Is in America, we have. Wait, hold on a sec. There's some kind of back echo. Do you have me on your phone or something, or on Periscope?
No, I've got my earphones on.
Maybe Sean does. Okay, but anyway, in America, circumcision is the norm. But why don't we call that male genital mutilation, right?
Yeah.
Because it is. I mean, you're cutting foreskin off of a boy while they're screaming and crying and in agony. There are procedures like that where it happens, and their penises are cut off. I mean, I would avoid people. Don't go down that rabbit hole, because if you do, it'll change things of life. But we don't call that female, penile mutilation. We just say, well, that's culturally acceptable, and that is again why so many of these issues come from. There's always a difference between when you classify as a cultural value, which culture being more associated with your race or your nationality, versus when you classify something as a religious value. And those, again, aren't the kind of conversations people are allowed to have. I love that people can't get over the, how do you say, Tariqa or?
Taqiyya.
Taqiyya. I got to learn how to pronounce Taqiyya so I sound informed. Half the people here, they are convinced that you're just lying to them the whole time, but it's like,
look,
yeah.
Look, see, this is the problem. Like, you guys are not gonna get anywhere if you just listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. You want to listen to people like Majid Nawaz, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Shireen Qudusi, what's his name, Tariq, that guy in Canada, the huge fat guy, Zuhdi Jas. All of these people, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and you will get nowhere. Okay, you need to speak to Muslims that have actual credibility in the Muslim community, who understand the Islamic tradition, who is going to tell you, like I'm telling you, that there is something called female circumcision in Islam, that the woman has to obey her husband, that there is something called jihad in Islam, and that's our religion. Okay, it doesn't mean that I want to murder all of you guys. There's a big difference there between people that are just going to tell you what you want to hear, and an actual practicing Muslim who wants to have a dialogue with you to find some sort of way where we can live in a civil society without killing each other.
And that's where I'm at. That's always been my perspective, is that if we're talking to each other, we're not killing each other. So I'm pro talking to people, and it gets back to, in America, I'm more worried about Antifa coming after me and smashing me with a brick or something. And this is just real talk. Is I'm way more concerned if I'm out in public with some Antifa lunatic than some Muslim lunatic. So then people are like, well, you should hate all Muslims. And I go, look, man, in my world, these Antifa people, I had an Antifa guy come and try to sucker punch me, right? And then I blasted him in the face or whatever. But when I'm out and about and I see Antifa people, that's my terrorism. That's the threat that I've worried about. And those people are not Muslims, at least last I checked.
Yeah. I mean, you're more likely to be assassinated by the Clinton crime family than you are by an Islamic terrorist.
This is true. Why do Muslims hate dogs?
We don't hate dogs, actually. Dogs are, their saliva is ritually impure. So if a dog licks us, we have to wash ourselves in a certain way. But we don't actually hate dogs. We're allowed to keep guard dogs as security and as farm dogs and things like that. One of the schools of law in Islam don't believe that dog saliva is ritually impure, and you can have dogs in the house and things like that. I myself, growing up, I had a Doberman Pinscher and a German Shepherd. So we don't have a problem with dogs, and that's also, I mean, a cultural thing where some Muslims misunderstand the ruling on dog saliva, and they end up not liking dogs in general. So we don't hate dogs.
Okay, here we got a softball question for you. So because I'm asking questions, so if I get a softball, I'm gonna ask the softballs too. So I don't want people crying. I don't want to trigger people. I mean, my God, speaking of snowflakes and people being triggered, I'm fascinated. People are being triggered that I'm just having an open Q&A with the guy. Meanwhile, I'm the guy. I'm no platform by everybody. I'm banned from TV, and everybody's like, I can't believe it. Cernovich is being banned to left. But then I'm supposed to no platform Muslims who are 1.5 billion people in the world. It's like, come on, guys. So we do get a softball from time to time. Here's a softball. What are the top two misunderstandings held by Americans about Muslims?
The biggest misunderstanding is that non-Muslims think that Muslims worship Muhammad. Muhammad is the prophet and messenger of God, so we don't worship him. We worship God Almighty. And the second misconception probably is that non-Muslims believe that Muslims are trying to establish a caliphate in your countries.
Okay, yeah, and that actually came up too. So are Muslims trying to establish a caliphate? What's a caliphate, and how does a caliphate differ from Shariah law?
Okay, the caliphate is the defined structure of governance in Islam, where we have one ruler who is appointed to be the spiritual and political ruler of the Muslims. And the way he's chosen by I don't want to call it a democratic process, but it involves consultation with the people that he's going to govern, and they need to agree that he's going to be their ruler because they need to give him a pledge of allegiance. So it has democratic aspects and authoritarian aspects within it. So what was your second question again?
Well, how is the caliphate different from Shariah law?
Oh, the caliph, which is the name of the ruler, he is religiously obligated to make sure Sharia law is implemented in the lands that he rules. So he is the one who is divinely held accountable for the implementation of Sharia in the country. So Sharia is the law. The caliphate is the system of government.
Gotcha. So you would say then the two biggest misunderstandings are that Americans hold about Islam and Muslims is that you don't worship Islam and that you're not trying to establish a caliphate in the West.
Yeah.
Okay.
How would they do it anyway? There's only like 3 million or 3 to 7 million Muslims in America. How will they establish Sharia law? It would take several hundred years before they even have a majority. And I believe that the American system of government has checks and balances to prevent that kind of situation from happening. Plus, you're all armed.
Well, yeah. In Jordan they are too, and that's what's keeping ISIS out. They're well, the way my answer to that would be, you don't get the whole country to be a caliphate, but you get sort of no-go zones where you have somebody who's responsible, like Dearborn, for example. Dearborn, Michigan is an example of that. That's where one of the big female genital mutilation cases is coming out of. So you would say, well, we can't have all of America. We can't even have a state. But what we'll do is we'll all settle and repopulate Dearborn, and we'll all settle and repopulate different areas. And then these different areas would create no-go zones where the Western police would not be allowed to go into.
But those areas already exist in your countries. Philadelphia, Germantown is one place. There are places in New Jersey, just outside New Jersey. The place outside New Jersey is called Little Palestine. There's places in Texas. I mean, those places already exist in your countries. And whenever And that would be a better situation for you than to have Muslims completely spread out all over, because when they gather together, they're able to establish their religion better, and you're going to have less problems overall if the Muslims are bunched together in communities.
Here's the latest comment. But Mike, you're not having a conversation. You're having a weak conversation. This is nothing like your Twitter at all. You're being a pussy. And then they go, Tommy Robinson should debate you. But as much as I like Tommy, you and Tommy Robinson were supposed to have a head-to-head debate on Twitter, and I tweeted that out expecting to watch it. So people are saying that I'm not savage enough like Tommy Robinson, who I like and follow on Twitter, and I promote his stuff. So would you debate Tommy Robinson because I'm too much of a cuck right now?
Yeah, we tried to debate Tommy Robinson twice. He pulled out both times. First time it was a no-show, and he said that he forgot to schedule it. Second time, he just pulled out the day before the debate, and this was a charity debate. We actually put money in for children's charity for children with a very rare cancer. So he pulled out of a charity debate and violated a gentleman's agreement. Honestly, when I first got into researching this for the debate, I thought Tommy Robinson was, quite a sincere fellow, and he has legitimate concerns about Muslims in his country and the change of the demographics in his country. But I believe that he has some sort of agenda that he's pushing, and that, a debate with somebody like me doesn't forward that agenda, so he's not interested in that. So he pulled out twice.
I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I'm dropping a lot of losers from my, my periscopes and my videos, because I don't want dumb people and stupid people who can't think with nuance. So people are going, oh my God, Cernovich is throwing shade on Tommy. Wrong. If you think that, you're stupid and you need to unfollow me because you're not intelligent. I actually said I like Tommy's stuff. I promoted his stuff heavily. I've retweeted, done a lot to promote his brand. That said, as a journalist, the truth is that Nabil and Tommy were supposed to have a debate. I said on Twitter, looking forward to this debate. The debate never happened. That is 100% true. I can show you the tweets. I can find it. So that isn't throwing shade at Tommy. That was me saying I thought that Tommy and Nabil were going to have a debate. They talked about it on Twitter, and it never happened. So anybody who's mad at me because I'm, asking questions and not having a debate, this isn't a debate format. But I would love to see Tommy and Nabil debate. I would be happy to facilitate that and to promote that. Tommy and Nabil were supposed to debate, and it hasn't happened. So one guy's saying Tommy never backed out. You disappeared, Nabil. Is that true? So we got so we have now people saying Tommy Robinson never backed out, Nabil. You're practicing Taqiyya, whatever.
No, I have
actually backed out.
I have the Twitter direct messages between me and Thor Holt, who was facilitating the debate. So I have all of the Twitter messages between me and Thor to show that we were arranging the debate, and we arranged the debate in good faith. And the day before the debate, Tommy pulls out.
Gotcha. Okay. Question.
I even updated my blog about it, so it's there for everyone to see.
So there you go. I'm pro Tommy Robinson, so I'm not throwing shade at anybody. But that said, I'm just going to tell people what I saw on Twitter. And what I saw on Twitter, here, I'll see if I can find the tweet right now, actually. I tweeted out to Tommy, looking forward to this debate. So those of you who want to see a debate, watch Tommy and Nabil debate. I'm happy. I'll retweet that to high heaven. I'm very, very happy to see it. So yeah, that is, again, there's a problem that I've been having, and this happens to anybody who really has their profile rise up, which is that sometimes people who aren't really at a major league level find me, and then they see me read one thing, and then and this happens with Muslims too. There are Muslims who tell you that I hate Muslims, and you're trying to say, wow, you don't really have any idea, do you? You're just watching one tweet or two tweets or three tweets. Just because I criticize. My big issue, actually, what's my biggest issue is I'm more upset that you can't criticize Muslims without facing a huge backlash, and that we're not having these conversations. Rather than the merits of it, because I want to see Tommy Robinson to be able to debate in England, and I think it's bullshit that if Tommy crossed any kind of lines, that might be hate speech. I'm pissed off that the police are monitoring Islamophobic sentiment on Twitter more than they're monitoring the terrorists. So there's a lot of things wrong that clearly I have a big problem with. But
yeah.
I would say you're Mr. Free Speech guy as far as I know. You're not trying to get people arrested over tweets.
Look, I mean, just if we take it to the logical conclusion, and this is what I try to explain to all of the Muslims that chastise me for supporting you and that hate you. What is the logical conclusion of this speech policing? Muslims, for example, we have a Friday Mass, and we give a sermon at the Friday Mass. The logical conclusion of speech policing is there are a lot of beliefs in Islam that would be considered that you would consider offensive as a non-Muslim. And if we keep policing speech, the logical conclusion is that I'm going to have to submit my Friday Mass sermon to some government entity for approval before I can give my Friday sermon, because there are things in it that might be offensive to non-Muslims. So it's something that could backfire on Muslims, and they don't seem to get this.
Wow, there's a lot of dumb comments coming in. Mike, you've thrown more shade at Tommy Robinson than Muhammad. Have I thrown shade at Tommy Robinson? How have I insulted Tommy Robinson? If you guys really think that and you're not just trolling, then please never read me again, because you're just not an intelligent person. I've thrown zero shade. I've thrown anti-shade at Tommy. I've said I like Tommy. I retweet Tommy more than Nabil. But that said, if you're telling me I am, then I'm going to get mad and I'm going to retweet Nabil more, because now I find out that it triggers a bunch of crybabies that I don't want reading my stuff anyway. Because here's what I like. Here's what I love. I love people who are like, this guy's lying. He's a fraud. He's everything. They should be happy then that we're talking, because now everybody can see what a fraud you are and how bad Islam is. But people don't want to see that. So it really is amazing. Let's get some.
People are just intellectually lazy. It's on both sides, non-Muslims and Muslims. They're just very low reading comprehension, no intellectual humility. These are the problems that we're facing.
Well, what I think is interesting is people are expected to be an expert on everything. So I'm supposed to be an expert on Islam, and I'm supposed to be an expert on fake news, and an expert on free speech, and an expert on the parliamentary system in the UK, and an expert on was Corbyn going to win or Theresa May. And what triggers a lot of people is they'll say, what's your opinion on the election with Corbyn and May? And I told people, I don't know who's going to win. But in America, we have this view that if you're a journalist or a commentator or a pundit or whatever, you're supposed to have an expert level opinion on every single subject. And I don't. I'm not an expert on Islam. So maybe you are. Maybe you are lying to me in the world, and I'm just too unexpert to know. But my perspective is that I would rather talk to you and have you lie to me, because then I can go do my research, than not talk to you at all, because as you know, I'm just not going to believe everything you say is your word. So it really does fascinate me, though. Yeah, people are kind of binary. You're either pro-Muslim or you're anti-Muslim. And then if you're just kind of in the middle saying, hey, I know that I get a lot of fake news about me, so maybe there's a lot of fake news about Muslims out there, and maybe I don't want to spread fake news. A lot of people have a subject that. All right, so guys, get some more comments in real quick. If you're on YouTube, hit the like button if you're on YouTube. If you're on Periscope, we're going to take this over to YouTube. So click on that link and head on over to YouTube, because the video quality on YouTube is so much better. So if you're on Periscope, head on over to YouTube. All right, if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. Even if you hate Nabil, like that we're able to expose him and his lies to more people. Like that everybody can see that he is deceiving people. Like that we're exposing him, right? Because that's what this is all about.
I faced the same problem on the Syria issue, because I don't know what's going on in Syria, and I try to not have an opinion about it. And when I say that I don't have an opinion about what's going on in Syria because I don't know enough to comment, I get crazy comments from Muslims like, how dare you, are you an Assad supporter, blah 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 blah. It's like, exactly like you said, people are expected to have an opinion on everything.
Yeah, and then if you don't, it's because you're secretly covering things up, or you have an agenda. Yeah, she's talking extra loud. Yeah, or they think you have an agenda, or they have like a conspiracy theory. It's amazing to me. And again, it's amazing to me because one of my friends, we won't name her, but she's had to kind of publicly distance herself from me because the social pressures of being friends with me was too much because people lie about me. So that's what I find fascinating is that I'm one of the most lied about people on the internet. The fake, you know, the New York Times, everybody lies about me. And then people, here's what happens. People then don't have empathy. So for me, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that you're being lied about because I know that every day I'm a this, I'm a rape apologist, a white nationalist, a Nazi, a cyberbully, internet harasser, inciting people, right? There's fake news about me all the time. And I know it, so maybe there's fake news about other people. So those people who can't handle it, you're on the wrong place because we like to think big. All right, the Muhammad and the child bride thing. What is that about? Did Muhammad marry a child bride? Is Muhammad a pedophile? What's all that about?
Okay, so the Prophet Muhammad married, the marriage contract was done with his wife Aisha when she was 6 years old, and she moved in with him when she was 9, ostensibly after she reached puberty. So in the 21st century context, that would be considered a child bride. However, at that time in the 6th century of Arabia, she was a woman, and people were expected to be adults much younger in life. So in our context, that would not be considered, you know, a child bride or pedophilia. And you know, I think the pedophilia accusation is interesting because do victims of child sexual exploitation turn out to be well-rounded, normal individuals when they grow up? Most of the time, they'll have severe psychological damage to them. However, in the case of Aisha, we find that she was an Islamic scholar and what you would call a mufti, which is a cleric among the Muslims of the time, and other Muslims would go to her to have their religious questions answered. So she was an Islamic scholar, and she was a political leader, and you know, she was a very, you know, forceful woman who had no indication whatsoever of being, you know, abused of that in that sort of way.
Okay, here's a question just came in from Twitter, which is apparently you said, hope you're not talking about your prophet that way. It would be a statement of disbelief. You are. That was you and Shireen were arguing. Okay, so let me see if I can find some context for this. So I like to watch your back and forth. So those of you who don't know, Shireen Kudosi had said you got into it. So how do you answer people who say you should never criticize the prophet? Is that what you were saying? Is it appropriate to ever criticize Muhammad?
I mean, if you're a Muslim and you criticize the Prophet Muhammad, that is an act of apostasy in Islam. And Shireen has made these statements of apostasy on numerous occasions, in which case I don't believe that Shireen is actually a Muslim, according to the fundamentals of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, in the Islamic theology, the Prophet Muhammad is actually the greatest creation of God, you know, beyond the entire cosmos. So we hold him in such high esteem. It is impossible for a Muslim to claim that they are a Muslim and believe that the Prophet Muhammad, for example, as Shireen says, failed in his mandate, or that she herself is a better human being than the Prophet, or that the Prophet was you know, did things that were barbaric and things like that. I mean, it's impossible for a Muslim to believe those things and still call themselves a Muslim. So those are acts of apostasy in Islam. And there are a number of quote-unquote Muslim reformers who are actually not Muslim in that sense, because they don't have the fundamental beliefs that make one a Muslim. One of these guys, you might have seen him being retweeted a lot. His name is Qasim Rashid. So I just want you people to be careful. Not everybody who claims that they're a Muslim is actually a Muslim. And it's difficult for you guys as non-Muslims to understand, because you don't understand the nuances of Islamic theology, which is why I sort of advocate for, you know, people like you, people like Dave Rubin and things like that, to speak to mainstream Muslims who are accepted by the wider Muslim community, and not these fringe contrarians that, you know, might say a few shocking things that you might agree with and you might find interesting, and, you know, against the grain of, you know, they call it, you know, a breath of fresh air and things like that. You know, these people become, you know, internet famous, and then they get invited on all the shows, but in reality, these people have no credibility whatsoever in the Muslim community. Another example is Majid Nawaz. Majid Nawaz is an admitted agnostic. He has admitted to being an agnostic in private, so he is actually ipso facto explicitly a non-Muslim, and he's pretending to be Muslim. He's actually Majid Nawaz is the Sean King of the Muslims.
There, is that guy the Imam of Peace? Is that his Twitter handle? Who's
Imam Tawhidi? Imam Tawhidi.
Yeah, so I've been seeing a lot of his tweets kind of coming in, and so earlier you said that a misconception is that Americans have about Islam are that Muslims don't worship Muhammad, but you just said you can't criticize Muhammad. So what's the connection there between those two?
Okay, so the criticism of Muhammad is not allowed because God Almighty says that prophets and messengers are you know, are declared free from error in conveying their messages. So they are actually, it's impossible for a prophet or messenger to commit a mistake related to the religion or commit major sins of that in that nature. So in that case, we're not allowed to criticize a prophet because he is the one who delivered the message of God to us, and it's through him that we receive the message of Islam. If we start to criticize the prophet and on the assumption that the prophet is able to make mistakes, how do we know that he conveyed the message of Islam correctly? Yeah. So in that case, we're not. There's no contradiction there.
You ready for some questions? Some reader call-ins?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, your mic check. You hear me? Hello, we got a caller from California.
Hello, is that me?
That's you.
Hello.
Okay, yeah. Hi. I've seen your tweets before, and you just mentioned how there's so many people putting up the front that they are Muslim. Do you think there's a reason why people are scared to come out as ex-Muslims?
If they are ex-Muslim in the West, there is no fear whatsoever of coming out as an ex-Muslim. The only fear that they have is that they might be ostracized by their communities. There are several ex-Muslim organizations in North America and in Europe. They're quite open about their beliefs, and they're quite blatant about it.
Yeah,
so
I understand that it's very safe in the West. I mean, in Muslim countries.
Yeah, I mean, in Muslim countries, apostasy will have much more severe repercussions, especially if they're open apostates. However, there are a number of Muslims that are not exactly open apostates, but they will say things that are extremely problematic within Islamic teachings. So we have severe secularists and things like that who nothing happens to them. The only problem is if you have a country like Saudi Arabia, where apostasy is a crime, and open apostasy is actually considered an act of terrorism. For the most part, there are so many ex-Muslims in Muslim countries that they're able to go about their lives freely. Maybe they're not able to be very open about their beliefs, because obviously we are living in a Muslim society. It's the same as the way professing communism in America would be extremely socially disliked, if that would make sense.
I don't know. I live in San Francisco, so communists here, they have nothing to fear. But because this whole call is about Sharia, right? You're a pro-Sharia law Muslim. So,
yes.
For example, if a woman wanted to divorce her abusive husband, because I have many friends in Afghanistan who are abused by their husbands, and they do not want to divorce them because they're told that the children will go with the father. Is this part of Sharia law?
I don't believe so. I believe that if the children are still young and require the motherly attention, the children will go to the mother. And after they reach the age of,
it's after the child is breastfed and all that, that the children go to the father. Is that true?
No, it's not. The age that the children are allowed, the children are basically allowed to decide after they reach a certain age. I believe it's, I'm not sure whether it's puberty or whether it's 7 years old, but the children are allowed to decide. But if the children are dependent on the mother, they go with the mother.
What else do you have to say? Because she's just not to dox her, but she's from Afghanistan. We've talked before. She has a lot of critical views on how women are treated in the Arab world, the Muslim world. So is it possible to separate the way women are treated in the Muslim world as a matter of religion or as a matter of culture? So I'll ask her and then I'll ask you. So if we assume that women are mistreated in the Middle East and in the Muslim world, is that attributable to Islam, or is there some other cultural force at work?
I mean, there's no doubt that women are...
Since you asked me first, I'll just answer first.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe that Islam does affect the way people have their opinions towards women. I think it is affecting their opinions. Maybe some of it is very tribal. I know because I lived in Afghanistan, but a lot of it does come from what is in the Quran.
Nabil.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's no doubt that there are a lot of women that are mistreated in Muslim countries. And part of that does have to do with the improper implementation of Islamic teachings. However, I don't think that you can blame Islam as a whole for that. If you want to consider the fact that there are so many different there are so many different Muslim countries and so many women living in those countries that you can't attribute all the you can't attribute all of the mistreatment of women onto Islam, because there are so many women that don't have problems. If you look at domestic violence, for example, the people that are committing domestic violence, so wife beaters in general, these are not people that are religious in any sense of the word. Most of them are not observant, so they don't really care about the limits of Islam. So they're go ahead.
Mike, the other day you had Isabel Young, a journalist for Vice, and I wanted to actually call in that day. She was interviewing a theologian from Afghanistan, a member of parliament. He is, he represents his people, and he's a religious scholar. The topic was abuse against women. Can a husband rape his wife? His opinion was that it's not rape, basically. These are things that come from their religion. So what do you have to say about that? That's from that a man cannot, or he is able to force himself on his wife, and a woman cannot, and his wife cannot reject him.
The idea of marital rape as a legal concept is something that is very new in society. So I believe that the Imam reacted so negatively because rape is something that is very specifically defined in the Sharia, and it doesn't apply in the context of a marriage. What does apply is abuse. So if a man forces himself on his wife to the extent that he does physical and emotional harm to her, she has recourse in the Sharia courts. It would just not be dealt with as a quote-unquote marital rape case. It would be dealt with as a domestic abuse case. So the terminology is important.
So is her testimony the same as her husband's, or is it that because she's a woman, her testimony counts half as much?
No, in that case, because she would be, both the husband and the wife would be equal. In fact, the wife would have more weight because of if she has the proof necessary. Like if the husband forced himself on her, she would have you know, signs of being abused. So her word would have more weight in that case.
Okay, I'll have to look at some of this. So my last question is about what you had mentioned earlier, that in the context of 7th century Arabia, it was okay for Muhammad to marry 9-year-olds. Is that applicable today? Is a Muslim man, is he allowed to, or is a 9-year-old child able to consent to marrying a 50-year-old man in this current day and age? Or is that only applicable to that century?
Okay, so we have to understand how the legal code in Islam operates. The fiqh, or the law in Islam, has come to set certain limits. Okay, so the absolute floor of an age where a marriage contract can be facilitated is, I believe, 6 years old. However, the application of that rule will depend on a number of different factors like culture, place, things like that. Most importantly is that no harm comes to the bride. So no physical or emotional harm can come to the bride in this marriage happening. So this is why we have Islamic law is something that is very dynamic. It's actually a living tradition. We don't have, you know, it's not black and white. It's not binary logic. It's fuzzy logic in a way. That's why it is necessary for Islamic scholars to always be present and understanding of the culture and time that they're in, so that they can apply the Sharia law in a way that does not cause harm. So to answer your question, it would not be allowed for a 9-year-old man to marry a 9-year-old woman to marry a 60-year-old man, because in all likelihood this would result in, you know, severe harm to the girl.
Do you have anything else? Any other questions or points you want to make? Or because I know that you lived in the, you've lived in the Islamic world and have more personal experience in this than I have.
I think I'll let someone else ask some questions. I got mine out of the way, but
okay, great.
These are the typical answers I hear, so it's not much different than what I've heard before. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, so those of you who want to ask your questions, we got a call-in line for you. So the call-in number is 866-438-1487. Call on in, Nabil will answer them. That is 866-438-1487. I'm not really going to tone police. People can ask their questions. Make them on topic. We're not talking about Seth Rich. So I know somebody's going to call me and ask me about Seth Rich.
His name was Seth Rich. His name was Seth Rich.
Exactly. So no calls about Seth Rich. Let's keep it on topic. There, let's try not to scream, because not because I care, but because it'll just, the audio quality in here is not set up for it. Somebody asked, what are the equivalent of the 10 commandments of Shariah law?
Oh, we have, I mean, you would say, I guess, the 5 pillars of Islam and the 6 pillars of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, we have a higher overarching framework called the higher objectives of the Sharia, which is the preservation of religion, the preservation of life, the preservation of lineage, the preservation of property, and the preservation of the intellect. So all of Sharia falls under that sort of framework.
Okay, and we're also getting asked about cartoons, which is wow, we have a bunch of calls. Shit. Okay, before we get to there, we have a lot of people saying, and this is a criticism actually that I've made too. So just for those of you listening at home, a lot of people go, "Why isn't this like your Twitter?" Is because, well, he kind of knows my criticism, and one of my big criticisms is that Islam is the only religion where if you draw a cartoon, the adherents are going to come in and potentially murder you, shoot you with a gun, commit a terrorist attack. That is a legitimate criticism. So some things I don't view as legitimate criticisms, but the idea that you can do a film caricaturing the Mormon religion, play that in Broadway, no problem. But if we had a New York show where they did, Muhammad effigies where they were having sex with each other, there would be actually murder and terrorism at such a show. What's going on with that?
I mean, first of all, that would not be allowed because a part of their social contract with the state living in a non-Muslim country is that they obey the laws of that state. So First Amendment rights, American Muslims, let's take America for an example, as an example. Citizens of America, Muslim citizens of America are required to abide by First Amendment rights. And obviously, murdering people for expressing their opinion is completely wrong. Now, do we accept the fact that you believe that you can do these things, criticize, insult the messengers of Allah? No, we don't. We believe the same for Jesus and Moses and Noah, every single prophet and messenger of God. Something like Noah, the Noah movie, where they portray a prophet of God in a very negative light as a drunkard or something like that, or something like Piss Christ, would not fly with any Muslim whatsoever. Family Guy's criticism of Jesus, mocking Jesus, South Park's mocking of Jesus, The Simpsons mocking of Jesus, all of that, none of that would fly in our religion. It is not permissible to mock prophets and messengers of God. Beyond that, it is not permissible in our religion to mock anybody else's religion. So that is just a standard that we hold ourselves to. Now, in a non-Muslim country where things like this are allowed, I mean, we can express our condemnation, but that's the most that we're allowed to do. Are there going to be people who'd go too far? Yes, because, I mean, there's a lot of extremists out there, man. It's not just the Muslims. There's Antifa, there's Deep State, all of these people, man.
All right, so we got some callers on the line. If you're on the line, be patient. We have a bunch of callers. And are you tired, or can you keep going? How do you feel?
Let's go, man.
All right, so we got a bunch of you on hold. I'm going to take you one at a time, get your question out. You know me, I can do this stuff for hours. I got no problem taking all your calls. But if you're on hold, just be patient. We'll get to you in the order that you called in, for sure. All right, so we got a caller from Ventura, East California. How you doing? Hello.
Hi, yeah, I had a question. If you could ask the speaker what he feels about Wahhabism within the religion of Islam, and if he could expand on that, and how I think so many Muslims get lumped into one area without people even knowing about the different sects within those beliefs, and how some Muslims even, I think, attribute Wahhabism to some of the more violent attacks or beliefs.
Yeah, so Wahhabism in the context of Muslims is like Nazi in the context of American political discourse now. So anytime you have somebody that has, orthodox religious beliefs, they call him a Wahhabi. So Wahhabism is actually a revivalist movement that started in Saudi Arabia. I can't remember exactly when. It was a few centuries ago. And it was started by a man named Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And his main call was to call the Muslims of the Arabian Peninsula away from a lot of the polytheistic practices that they were doing. In doing so, him and his followers fell into a lot of extremism in that they killed a lot of Muslims unjustly. And there are many teachings in the Wahhabi understanding of Islam that do lead to extremist understandings of the faith, and a lot of the extremism that you have within the Arabian Peninsula is a result of literal and extreme interpretations of the teachings of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. The Wahhabi sort of understanding of Islam is basically the understanding that is followed by a lot of Saudi Arabian Muslims, but they follow a very toned down version that is sort of apolitical and declares complete obedience to the ruler. But there are more extreme interpretations of Wahhabi Islam out there. And that's just one example of ideological differences within Islam that could possibly lead to extremism.
Do you think that this type of doctrine or the Wahhabi, do you think that within countries like, France or UK and Europe, this type of extreme, the Wahhabi type of study, do you think that has any effect of that on many of the young lone wolf attackers? Do you see any correlation of them studying this from any imams or any religious leaders there that come from countries like, the Saudi Arabia or Qatar that have that as their official, doctrine or in their policies? Do you see any correlation there?
Lone wolf terrorists, they usually become radicalized on their own. So they are deliberately at odds with the wider Muslim community. Most of the time, they would clash with the imams and the leadership within their community because they have extreme ideas about the faith, and they would generally not associate with the wider Muslim community. So they are not taking their ideas and beliefs from the imams and the Muslim leadership in those countries. Now, that's not to say that quote unquote Wahhabi imams will say things in their congregations that you might find offensive. That's not the case. But I don't believe that there is a correlation between what you believe are extremist preachers in mosques and terrorist attacks, because the terrorists are, they are away from the Muslim communities, and they operate in their own little groups or enclaves or cells.
So you think that a lot of it, when you say they're operating their own groups or away from the local church, you think that in that sense, would you agree that they're getting a lot of their what they're learning maybe online or away from local physical areas then?
They learn stuff online, and they basically learn on their own. They basically try to interpret the religious text on their own, and they end up getting misguided because of that. More often than not, you'll find that these religious extremists that turn into lone wolf terrorists, they believe that the wider Muslim population are apostates because they are deviants and not following Islam properly. So we have a significant problem in our Muslim communities in that these extremists are away from the community, and they isolate themselves from the wider community in such that the Muslim leadership and the Muslim community in those areas might not be able to reach them to de-radicalize them, because they would reject attempts to de-radicalize them.
Yeah, so thank you for your call, Miss.
So most of those young, or most of those, they do that extreme view. That's even that is similar though to the Wahhabi type practice. So
not necessarily. Mainstream.
People not group all people into one particular group. So thanks so much. I appreciate the information.
Thank you. Appreciate the call. Yeah, they're so I guess here's what I'll do real quick, just because a lot of people would say, here's the three biggest criticisms that I have of Islam, Muslims in general. Is one is that every country that has a large Islamic male population, there's terrorism. Even in the Philippines, it isn't Catholics doing it. So people would say, why is it that in every country where there is a large Muslim population, there is terrorism? So is that cultural? Is that religious? Because people never have an open conversation about that.
Look, I mean, there is, there are teachings within Islam that can be misinterpreted to lead to terrorist acts. Okay. Now, when you have individuals within your societies that are extremely misguided and have these beliefs, then you're gonna have terrorism, because your societies are fragile to terrorism, because you have I believe, very free societies that sort of try to safeguard the rights of the individual, sometimes at the expense of the rights of the society as a whole. So this is what I believe is happening. I don't know if that's a very good answer. I don't know how to sort of describe it to you in a way that.
We got some more questions. We got Geneva, New York. You're on. You're live.
Hey, Mike, Nabil, I appreciate speaking with you guys. Quick question. I'm a Christian myself. A lot of times when I speak with or I hear from Muslims, they speak to the irreliability of the text of the Bible. But I'm just curious to know, in terms of the reliability of the Quran, and in terms of, I'm hearing that apparently after the third Caliph, they gathered up all the manuscripts and made their own original text of the Quran and burned the original, I guess the workings from how they came up with the Quran. I'm just wondering if that is being kind of used as their text, how can we use that as a reliable text? Wouldn't that bring into the reliability of the Quran?
Yeah. So what happened was what the third Caliph did was he gathered because the Quran actually has a number of different modes of recitation, and they're all part of the Quran. There's actually seven modes of recitation. What the third Caliph did was gather all of those modes of recitation into one codex, an official codex, beyond which no other codex was allowed to exist. And he made 7 copies of that codex and sent it to the 7 regions of the Muslim empire at the time. Now, the reason he did that was so that there would be no confusion in how to correctly recite the Quran. The recitation of the Quran is not something that is arbitrary. It is transferred from from God Almighty through the Archangel Gabriel to Prophet Muhammad, who then taught it to his companions, who then transmitted it to their students. So there is a specific way to recite the Quran, and those specific ways to recite the Quran were codified in these in the codex that the third Caliph compiled, so that there would be no confusion whatsoever in the Muslim world on how to recite it. Along with those copies, he sent master reciters with those copies in order to teach the people how to recite the Quran. So this codex that was compiled contains all of the different modes of recitation of the Quran. Therefore, there is no discrepancy in the preservation of the Quran, because what was burned or ordered to be burned were all the unofficial copies. It's like if you had everybody, it's like the Constitution of the United States. If you had everybody handwriting it for themselves and having their own copies, there are going to be, mistakes could creep in, you know?
Thank you for the call, sir.
Right. So it sounds as though their way of making sure that there would be no kind of mixing of interpretation was this codification of the text. The thing that I struggle with oftentimes is, though, that sometimes, from what I understand, the Hadith are what provide the commentary for the Quran, and as such, different sects of Islam end up picking and choosing which Hadith they choose. And so when a certain sect chooses an improper set of Hadith, it brings about the misinterpretation. How can one, as a Christian, or even as a Muslim, or even as a secular individual, be able to understand from the Islamic perspective which is the correct set of hadiths to which to ascribe to? Would you say that, I don't know if you've ever heard of this individual, Dr. Yasser Qadi, or potentially Dr. Shabir Ali, would you look to those examples as adequate teachers, or I guess individuals that portray accurate representation of Islam?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Beyond the actual codification of the Quran, we have the unbroken oral tradition and chain. So everything in Islam is transmitted via a student-teacher chain. To understand what is quote-unquote correct Islam, you have to understand whether or not the person speaking about it received this via the chain of transmission, and that applies to the Quran as well as it applies to the Hadith. And that is the way Islamic knowledge is preserved. It's preserved from student to teacher for 1400 years. Somebody like Yasir Qadhi is someone who has he has the connection to that tradition. So he's somebody who can authoritatively speak on Islam. Shabir Ali does not have the connection to that tradition, so he is not as reliable as Yasir Qadhi. His expertise is in Christian theology.
Thank you for the call, sir. We got another call. Leesburg, Virginia, you're live.
Yes, hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, bro, we hear you.
Oh, okay. First of all, I just wanted to say I appreciate Mr. Nabil for talking to people and being open about his faith.
Thank you, sir.
I have some questions. I just wanted to say something about myself. After the events of 9/11, I took a lot of time and I started to read the Quran, and I started to read some of the Hadith also. I read the portions of the Hadith of Ibn Ishaq, Bukhari. I also read some of the histories by Tabari, Al-Tabari. Are you familiar with Al-Tabari?
Yes, all three of those.
Oh, okay. I just have very specific questions about some of the exegesis or some of the verses in the Quran. So, if you take Muhammad's second career, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, when he began to gather an army, and he began to attack people on the pretext of disbelief, what was the morale of attacking people who were disbelievers, in your opinion? And also, I wanted to ask a question about Quran 8:12.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good place to start. So, the invasions, the forced conversions or whatever. That's a good. We'll just sort of cut that off there for now, and then let people talk.
Yeah. Okay. So the first 13 years of the Prophet's mission, he was exclusively just proselytizing peacefully. He was not allowed to fight, even though he was persecuted and his followers were persecuted. Many of them were killed, and the Prophet, the pagans of Mecca tried to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad, and he narrowly escaped. After they went to Medina, once they had a base to operate from, the verses were revealed that they were allowed to fight those who fight them. And you have to understand, they were in a state of war with the pagans around them. They were in a constant state of fearing for their safety. You would say their national security. So the raids and the battles fought by the Messenger of Allah, Prophet Muhammad, were in order to safeguard his fledgling society from attack. In fact, several attacks were launched on the Muslim nation, very small Muslim nation at the time, in order to try to wipe them out completely. So these were matters of self-defense, and also you could call them economic sanctions and embargoes. So they played that game as well, because I mean, they're in a state of war. What do you want them to do? They're not just gonna wait there and get killed.
No, I understand when you're in a state of war, but then you have Quran verses that say something like Quran 8:12, I will instill terror in the hearts of the unbelievers, smite ye above the necks, and smite all the fingertips off of them. Or another one that says, surely the vilest of animals in Allah's sight are those who disbelieve. Now, in terms of the context of that war, maybe he was talking about the people at that time, so that would make it anachronistic. But on the other hand, if you talk about people now, if people are reading those verses, they might think of them as we, the unbelievers, and they, the Muslims, who are doing the written exhortations straight from the Quran. Would you comment on those two verses? Are they supposed to be taken in the context of the time, anachronistic, or are they immutable?
Yeah. Okay. So I just looked up the 8:12 verse that you quoted. Okay. And this verse is saying that, remember when your Lord inspired to the angels, I am with you, so strengthen those who have believed. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. So strike them upon the necks and strike them from every fingertip. So God Almighty is addressing the angels here. And second, it's in the context of warfare. The second verse, the second verse that you mentioned, every religion has. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
But I'm asking, is it in the context only of that battle, or is it an immutable statement in the Quran for all time?
So that particular verse was revealed in a certain context of that battle. Now, we can take lessons from that verse and apply it to our time. Not, verbatim, because we don't know whether, there are angels fighting with us. But I mean, all of these verses, despite the fact that they were revealed for a certain context and they're talking about specific, events, they have some lessons and benefits that we can derive for our time. Maybe not for somebody like me living in Dubai, because that is a wartime verse in the context of battle. But for people, if there are, legitimate, fighters who are defending themselves against aggression or something like that, they might read this verse and, get some benefits out of it.
Right, and there's very many verses that are like that. And as I was reading through it, I was trying to conflate it with what was going on in Muhammad's life at the time that they were allegedly revealed. I'm trying to get a picture of what was going on in Hijaz in the 7th century, and how Muhammad, as the perfect example, is interpreted in modern context. And sometimes I feel as though I can easily glean the justification that terrorists use to attack unbelievers or to attack people who resist Islam.
Yeah, that usually happens.
Until all fitna, until the end of all fitna or all disbelief. It just seems, it's a very interesting history. Also, from the history of Tabari, I could go on for a long time, and I'm sure there's other callers, and maybe I don't need to. But I do want to ask one more question, and that's about Aisha. And we talked about her earlier. She was betrothed when she was 6, between a contract between Muhammad and Abu Bakr. That's Aisha's father and Muhammad's father-in-law, and the first Rashidun Caliph, I believe.
Yes.
So when Muhammad came to him, he asked Abu Bakr for Aisha's hand in marriage. Do you think that Aisha had any consent in that matter, because she wasn't present in the conversation between Muhammad and Abu Bakr? And Abu Bakr agreed to it until she had her first menstrual cycle, which happened when she was 9. Do you think that at any point in that time, Aisha had any right to her own consent in that marriage?
Yeah, so what we derive from that incident is something that is in Islamic law, where the father is allowed to betroth and marry off his daughter if she is a virgin without her explicit consent to a man who is suitable. And there is no man who is more suitable than the Prophet Muhammad. However, the woman, when she comes of age and is able to discern matters, she has the right to annul the marriage if she wants to. Does that make sense?
Well, then I have another question. In the Quran, I believe that Muhammad prohibited his wives from marrying after he was gone. But when he died, his wives were not allowed to remarry.
No, Muhammad did not, peace be upon him, did not prohibit them. God Almighty prohibited them from marrying marrying other men after.
But if you're an unbeliever, you would say that Muhammad wrote that in the Quran.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I don't know. Is that something? Is that a problem?
Well, usually when a spouse dies in the Western civilization, the woman has right to remarry after her husband is gone, even though she still loves her husband. And maybe Aisha loved Muhammad. I'm not saying she did, but she was only like 17 years old when he died, and she was left as a spinster for the rest of her life. So she seemed to go along with it, as you say earlier. She became an Islamic scholar, and she also didn't she meet the Muslims in battle too? Wasn't there a rift during her life? Wasn't she part of the battle with Ali?
Well, yeah, she came out in order to reconcile the parties. She didn't actually come out in battle against Ali. A lot of there's a misconception that she,
I believe.
yeah. So she was on a camel in a litter. So she came out to reconcile between the parties, and she ended up getting caught in the crossfire, I guess. If you're a non-believer, that situation might seem, I hate to use the word problematic, but that's the way that it is. The wives of the Prophet are they have a very special status. They're called the mothers of the believers. Okay, so they have a status to Muslims as if they are our mother, and you can't marry your mother. I mean, it's a metaphorical motherhood, but
one of Muhammad's other wives.
Could you repeat that again, sir?
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that again?
Oh, with Mike's permission, I'd just like to ask one more question about one of Muhammad's other wives.
Yeah, Mike's on the phone. You can continue your discussion.
I'm sorry?
You go ahead. Michael had to take a phone call, but you guys can continue.
I wanted to ask about Safiya, one of Muhammad's wives, and yes, the Jewish tribe of the Banu Nadir that he fought at Khaybar.
Yes.
And this was after the Battle of the Trench, where he basically held off the Meccans when they tried to attack him in Medina. And yes, he felt like the Banu Nadir had collaborated with the Meccans. And so he attacked their tribe, and he defeated them very easily. And Kinana, the treasurer, was tortured with fire kindled on his chest to reveal the location of hidden treasure. And eventually he was beheaded. And his wife was the beautiful Safiya, the princess of the tribe. And that was given to another of Muhammad's soldiers as a captive. But Muhammad found her to be beautiful, so he wanted her for himself. And the same night that he had killed her father and killed her husband, he took her into his tent. Do you think that she had fallen that quickly in love with Muhammad?
Yeah, so the first part of the story about Kinana, I don't know if that story is authentic, because you mentioned that you read from Ibn Ishaq and At-Tabari.
And he go ahead.
Our history books collate a lot of narrations from that time without necessarily vetting them for authority. Bukhari, on the other hand, is completely different. If you believe that a narration was in Bukhari, then I would have to accept it. However, I don't know from which source you got this narration from, so I don't know whether that story is authentic.
But Ibn Ishaq was the first Hadith author. He was. Yeah.
Yeah, but you.
Well, it was about a generation after Muhammad had died. He authored his Hadith. And it was the first Hadith, but it didn't have any chains. And so that, you know, I understand that's why a lot of Muslims don't accept some of his Hadith. But I have to say that there are other Hadith authors that do have chains that corroborate many of the stories that Ibn Ishaq had revealed or related to.
Yeah, okay, but okay, I get what you're saying. So so if there are no chains on the narration, then we have to do a lot more verification to understand whether it's true. So on the face of it, I don't know whether the story is authentic, so I can't really comment on it. Now, Safiya, on the other hand, that's a well-known story. She was taken as a captive after the battle. Her husband and father were killed. She was taken by one of the soldiers, but one of his companions said that told Muhammad, peace be upon him, that she is a noble woman. You should take her for yourself. And when she came to Muhammad, he offered either you can be a slave, or I can free you and marry you. Now, in those days, people get married they don't get the idea of a love marriage is, you know, something quite new. So she would have, I guess, calculated that getting married to him would be a better situation for her in this context than, you know, remaining a slave. And the story goes that she did not fall in love with the Prophet Muhammad immediately. She felt a lot of hatred to him for quite a while after they were married. However, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, won her over, and then she fell in love with him. So it is not the case that she fell in love with him immediately. It was a marriage of convenience from her perspective that ended up being a full, you know, loving marriage.
Well, there are some Hadith that say she never fell in love with him, and there are some Hadith that say she never converted to Islam.
As far as I know, she converted to Islam, and
beautiful.
Yeah, we're getting into a lot of, you know, technicalities, but the thing is that I'm not an Islamic scholar. I can answer to the best of my ability, but if we get into a lot of technicalities, then I'm not going to be able to answer as well as I would like.
I want to say something. I have a million questions that are like that. A lot of the attacks that Muhammad did, a lot of the things that he did, would be very difficult for a modern secular person to accept. You know, like the Banu Qurayza, when he attacked them, they were another Jewish tribe, one of the 3 Jewish tribes of Medina. Yep. He attacked them, and he took the men out to a trench after defeating them, and the boys also. And he pulled down their pants to see if they had reached puberty. Anybody who had reached puberty had their heads chopped off.
Yep.
And who hadn't was taken as part of the captives and distributed as the war booty. But what I would have to say, and I hope you understand this, I'm not against Muslims, but what I want Muslims to understand is that they may have to start to look into the concept of anachronism versus immutability. Now, it's no longer acceptable to attack people and take them as war captives and sex slaves or as slaves. We can't do that anymore. In the ancient world, they could do that because everybody did it. It was terrible. That's the way they lived. But we've kind of changed our morality. And the other thing is death to apostasies, or death to apostates. That's a state crime. Islam has to define itself as either a religion or a state institution. It can't be both. And when you start to introduce laws according to Sharia, for example, death to apostasy, the imposition of jizya tax, I could have a whole conversation on the jizya tax, which is an extortion fee paid by non-believers if they wanted to keep their own religion. You can't do that. You're tax exempt in a secular society. Your mosques are tax exempt. So we forward that concept, and I want you to appreciate it. But I also want to appreciate the idea that you're going to have to move some of the ideologies of Islam to the position of anachronisms in order to appreciate secular values. But if you've come to take over and establish Shariah law and make it the new law of the land, well then we have two states within a state. And that doesn't always lead to a good situation. But, you know, we like our Muslim neighbors. I like working with Muslims. I think they're good people. But I think they need to explore the word anachronism versus immutability. And that's my opinion.
Thanks. By the way, sir, are you on Twitter? A lot of people have said they really liked your point. Are you on Twitter or something, a Twitter handle that we can link to or something like that?
I do not have a Twitter handle. No, I'm an old fogey, and I've been over to the Middle East, and I've been to Jordan, and I've been to the original Mecca, and I understand what a Qibla wall is, by the way, and I understand where the original Qibla walls were. But anyway,
how did you get into Mecca?
And I'm not very electronically savvy. YouTube is about my only my only source, but I wouldn't mind, you know, revealing my information, but not online.
Okay, gotcha. Well, thank you for the call. People definitely enjoyed your perspective. We have a few more people online, but thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Nabil. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I mean, he made some good points. Unfortunately, they're very technical. It would be a very long discussion to answer all of them.
Well, and that's my whole perspective, is that there should be more like that, but people don't want to have those conversations, and that includes people on my team. You know, my team, half the people listening, you know, that supposedly support free speech are just really furious that I'm not, you know, calling you a pedophile supporting, you know, Muslim, which that's kind of part of the problem. Is if you want to have conversations with people, you have to actually, there's a time to scream at each other, which is what Twitter is good for. And then there's a time to actually debate, and then there's a time to have a conversation. Redondo, California, how you doing?
Hey, thank you. We've been waiting for someone like you for a long time in America.
Thank you.
I wanted to address the unceasing intellectual gymnastics Nabil has to go to try to explain Islam and its legalistic system, which is very similar to the legalistic system of Judaism, which suffered from being race-oriented. Thank God we had Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian, obviously. And I wanted to just say, you know, it's important to know that in the Bible, St. Paul, who was a Jew, came to justify the people not through the works of law, which is all this Sharia nonsense that respectfully is being spouted and attempting to be dissected, but through faith in a higher power and in love and mercy and the building of a correct conscience. That's what Christianity addresses, which is the most difficult thing to address in a human being, is to deal with their conscience. Because once you have a correctly oriented conscience and a set of morals, you don't need a myriad of laws, legalese, restrictions, as is enunciated by Islam and Judaism alike. Now, my question to Nabil is, if Islam is so correct and righteous, why is it that Islam has continued to fail to protect any God-given or unalienable rights to people in any of the countries that they've dominated?
What makes those rights God-given or unalienable? And what rights are you speaking of?
Well, there it is. You actually we've given you enough rope and you've hung yourself. You really don't believe that there are any unalienable rights and anything that a human born into this planet has the right to without the privilege of a man above them telling them. And that's exactly, it just shows that you are incoherent with the Constitution of this country and the Founding Fathers' principles, because you don't even have a compass for this conversation.
Well, To be fair, he actually said at the beginning that Muslims belong in Muslim countries. That was sort of, so people who have tuned late, we had that conversation earlier, and that was his whole point, which is he has said that Muslims belong in Muslim nations. So in a way, I think that he probably agrees with you, although I'll let him, you know, reply on his own. But that was kind of the point of the conversation, is how do people reconcile Shariah law with the West?
Well, what about the Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb? How does he explain that?
You're a bit all over the place. Now, first of all, I'm not an American, so I'm not required to abide by the U.S. Constitution. I live in Dubai. And second of all, the U.S. Constitution is a document written by men. And you guys are having discussions all the time whether the Constitution is a living document, or whether the Constitution is the words are, you know, set in stone and meant exactly what the founding fathers said. I mean, Scalia died, and he was the biggest proponent of the Constitution as a sort of a fixed document. And I actually, after reading about Scalia when he died, I actually respect him a lot, because he seems the most logically coherent out of the Supreme Court justices. You have a discussion in your society that the U.S. Constitution can be changed over time.
Fathers, although they were deists, many of them, and not practicing religious people, they had the goodwill and integrity to represent their constituents and know that many Americans were in fact Christian people of faith. And so they ensured that there was no authority over man other than a constitutional republic which ensured,
except the Negroes,
right,
except the Negroes,
to express their own will and freedom, to understand God if they wanted or not. And no Islamic country has ever dared to give freedom to people to experience on their own, because you guys reign in darkness. And in darkness, you thrive. And you want to ensure darkness so that there's never any competition. That's why there's no freedom of speech. That's why there's no right to protect yourself with armaments.
Yes, sir, there's one correction about the Constitution. Negroes don't fall under your original Constitution. It was amended after that. So the original founding fathers didn't think that slaves and black folk and, you know, dark-skinned people were allowed to be free in their country. So what discussion are we having here? People did a lot of bad shit in the past. So
nice diversion. Nice diversion.
It's not a version, it's fact, dude.
You guys always run into you Muslim slave traders.
You don't know your own Constitution. You don't know your own Constitution. Negroes were not allowed to be free human beings in your country when the Constitution was written.
So don't get
Come on, man. You want to talk to me? How can me, a Sri Lankan brown person from Dubai, understand your Constitution better than you?
Through faulty belief systems. We have evolved in the U.S. The Western world has evolved. When was the last time? Did Saudi Arabia outlaw slavery in 2005? Don't start with me with that. We're on to your nonsense. We give you enough rope to hang yourself. Your pants are pooped. You pooped your own pants on this Cernovich call. And
all right, thank you, sir.
I'm so
thankful
for Cernovich allowing free speech, and you stepping into the arena. There's not enough brave people like you. Although you're completely mistaken, and if you had any sense, you would turn away from darkness and step away from legalese and deal with your conscience and address truth and put away the lies and the contortions in order to make your faulty belief system consistent with any of the truths and realities of this world.
Would you, the caller, and Nabil, be interested in maybe having a debate somewhere else? Not that you can't have it here. No, I mean, people are loving this right now and having a good time. But would you two be interested in carrying on this conversation? Maybe.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Are you on Twitter?
Give this man as much. Yeah, my Twitter handle is alt-might with an M.
Okay, alt-might is your Twitter handle. So let me see.
Yeah,
okay, so
I follow you.
All right, so I'll give you a follow back. So Nabil, do you guys want to do like a full-on, thing or what?
Look, man, he should speak to an American Muslim who has more understanding of the Constitution than I do, because I'm, not in America. He could probably get a better discussion out of somebody like, like Sherman Jackson or Hamza Yusuf or Zaid Shakir or Hamza Wal Maqbool. All of these people are around there, holler at them, man, holler at them.
Continuing to talk and just try to do all this intellectual gymnastics and contort yourself. It's not about the law, bro. It's about faith. It's about loving each other through a clear conscience and a pure heart. That's what this planetary, any kind of spirituality needs to be based off of, not a warlord's political ideology that masquerades like a pious meekness. You guys masquerade as pious and meek, but you're promoting a political ideology.
All right, thank you for the call, sir. We got two more we want to take. We got Pittsburgh. Well, do you have anything to say to that before I move on? I don't want to, cut people off.
No, I mean, it's like, I don't think you can have a discussion with people like that. They've already got their mind made up, so.
All right, we got a caller from Pittsburgh, Missouri. How you doing?
Hey, finally got on there. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
I had friends in the past, okay, when I went to school between 88 and 90. And one was from Palestine. I lived with them. And one was from Kuwait, and one was from Saudi Arabia, all right? And they all went to college with me. And now, we weren't close. We were just school friends. Now, they were all worldly. They used to drink. They used to shoot women all the time. 5 women a day. No problem. Okay? There's a rule in the book as far as the Quran is concerned.
Yeah, man. What can you do?
Now, as soon as their friend came over with all dressed up with white, all they acted all holier than thou. Now, whether they're playing me or were they just playing the act, that they were just like kind of people like were like, they were cool. And then, but they went back. They didn't really want to go back. They really didn't want to go back after they graduated. They didn't want to go back to Saudi Arabia. They didn't want to go back to Kuwait. Palestine guy stayed here. He decided to become an American. Now, the irony is this, is that when I went back after the Gulf War happened, okay, those guys had already gone back, okay? And what I'm trying to say is this, bottom line, is that after that happened, and I went back to New York, where my homeland is, okay? And when I went back to my own turf, and I've seen how Long Island, New York became totally inundated by the Turkish people, who are all Muslim, okay? Who, and also ones from other areas, who took over 7-Eleven and everything else, and they totally treated us totally rude. And they're totally nasty. I was never treated like that before. It was like a total culture shock. Then the first bombing of the Trade Center happened back in like 92, early 90s, okay? And then after that, it was a deal with, being treated that way when I used to go to the airport. They used to cuss at me. And they used to call me different names in Arabic, okay? And then call me infidel and laugh at me and block my way, okay? And spit at me, okay? So you tell me, okay? How much tolerance should that be? Okay, and then all of a sudden, 9/11 happened. I'm already gone. I'm already back here in Missouri, okay? And I'm not a racist, and I believe in God, and I believe in country. This is my country. This is my country. Get the hell out of my country. I believe in what you just said. You want to go back home? Fine. You know what? Take all the Muslims and take them all back to where they belong, back to Islam, okay? Fine. You know what? We need to get the hell out of there. We don't need to be over there. I agree totally. We shouldn't even be there. Not even one soul should be there. Leave that desert rat hole to yourselves, okay? As far as I'm concerned, that's how I look at it. I'm sorry if this seems harsh, but that's the truth.
Well, we're all people can, like I said, people can call in, and that's kind of the whole point is there, people in the YouTube comments still haven't figured out that I'm just If you guys want to call in with those comments, that's fine. And if he wants to reply, that's fine. That's the whole point of free speech. So go ahead, Nabil. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this misconception that Muslims are required to be or supposed to be sort of extremely pious, angelic people. But the truth of it all is that the vast majority of Muslims are not very good Muslims, and you're going to have shitty people among those Muslims and good people among those Muslims. And I'm so sad that this gentleman had a very bad experience with people from Muslim countries, and that affects your lived experience affects how you view other races and other cultures. So I believe he's justified in feeling the way he does. And like I said, it's better if Muslims live in Muslim countries and Western nations stop meddling in Muslim lands, so that things could be a bit more stable.
Thank you for your call, sir.
Okay. Take care. God bless. Bye.
God bless.
All right. Iowa City, Iowa, you're live.
Hey, my question is about integration.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get in on the beginning of this, but how do you propose we live together when we have some no-go zones at Dearborn and people with machine guns, I guess, in their basement? And then we have people in New York sitting on sidewalks demanding Shariah Law. I mean, I'm all for getting along and integration, but I don't understand how it's going to work.
Ma'am, there are neighborhoods with black people that you can't walk in as a white person right now. There are Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods where if you go in dressed inappropriately, you will be accosted and treated a certain way. I mean, I don't know I don't know how I can answer that, because in every nation that has that is multicultural, there are so many areas within those countries that are sort of enclaves of certain ethnicities. There's like Chinatown and Little Cuba and all of these places. I don't see people having that same reaction to Orthodox Jews or Chinese people or Asian people or Hispanic people. I don't see that same reaction. So either you are a society that has that values quote unquote individual rights and lets people do what they want to do as long as they don't harm other people, or you are a society that expects a monoculture. You can't have it both ways. I mean, there are furries, that there are otherkin, and otherkin are technically okay in your society, but a Muslim woman walking around in hijab is a faux pas. That does not make sense to me.
Well, we've been living multiculturally for many, many years without any problems. And it seems like the last 8 years when Obama was here, the refugees, they're great. I have no problem. But when they hold up signs that say, death to America, this does not make integration very easy. And then they want to change our Constitution, and this is our Constitution. They don't have a right to change that. And I see this integration turning into a civil war eventually. And I'm trying to figure out, how is this ever going to work?
I mean, it's not. I mean, that's the whole point. Is there? So there's going to be in Europe. There's going to be a civil war between the new population and the native population. So how do we prevent that in the U.S.? Hey, that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. But no, I mean, there's going to be a major civil war in Europe. There's really no question about that. It will lead to bloodshed, and then it'll be a function of who wants it more and who doesn't. But I don't see in Western Europe, I don't see an alternative to, if that's your question. In Western Europe, I don't see that there's going to be an alternative to civil war. In America, the demographics a little bit differently, so maybe there's a chance we can avoid that here. But in Western Europe, Germany, the UK, France, 10, 20 years, there either will be demographic replacement such that they can govern the way they want to do it, and the natives are going to have to put up with it, or there's going to be some kind of civil war. And I don't see any alternative to that. People keep wanting to know if you're a CARE or a Muslim Brotherhood member. I've gotten that question probably 100 times. Mike, is this guy a CARE or a Muslim Brotherhood member? Oh, by the way, ma'am, thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, so are you a CARE or a Muslim Brotherhood member?
I am neither. I'm not an American citizen, so I'm actually quite critical of a lot of these American Muslim organizations.
All right, we got a few more. It looks like we got 4 more callers. All right, so we have 4 more callers, and that is it. Before we take these final 4, we're on the final 4. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, like the button even if you don't like Nabil, because if you believe that what he said is so outrageous and appalling and offensive, then you should be glad that it is getting a broader audience, because then people can recognize how appalling it is, right? So that's my free speech thing, and that's why, you know, when somebody like Kathy Griffin gets fired, I'm in a sense glad, because it's a scalp. But on the other hand, I am glad that there's people like her out there saying what they're saying, because in my view, that kind of discredits the left. It is self sort of discrediting. So that's always been my take, is let people on, let people talk, let people fully explain themselves. And if they are really that bad, then people are going to recognize it and figure it out. And if they are good, then you should figure out why they're good and what about it is good, and refute it. So 4 more calls. If you're in Simi Valley, California, Cleveland, Texas, Warren, Michigan, or Southfield, Michigan, we're going to take your calls. Otherwise, that's it. Okay. Southfield, Michigan, how you doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Is that me?
That is you.
Okay. Well, my question is about Muhammad.
Okay.
And the Quran says that Muhammad is perfect example for Muslims.
Okay.
And Muhammad's life is not admirable. He took sex slaves, he raped women, he beheaded people, he did all sort of things that are as awful as anybody who's ever lived. So my question is, Nabil, do you disavow Muhammad?
Of course not. I would not be a Muslim if I disavowed Muhammad. I mean, a lot of people, you have to understand the world that he lived in. Okay, so that was the way the world was. They were constantly under war and under threat, and they had to do what they had to do to survive. And if you have some sort of problem with that, then I need you to disavow the 26,000 bombs that were dropped from drones by the Obama administration and your government.
I certainly disavow that. But
okay.
Well, that's the thing. We'll take a call for a minute, but I mean, that's why I think a lot of people, this is an unusual conversation in that most of the people who are talking, Nabil actually believes Muslims should stay in Muslim countries, and most of the people who are going to call in say, yes, we agree with you, and moreover, we're tired of our government going in and messing up the Muslim nation. So this is hard for people who follow simple narratives to keep up with, because we're here saying, yeah, we totally agree. The Americans should not be involved in the Middle East. And you're saying, hey, that's a great idea, and I think Muslims should primarily remain in Muslim countries, that they'll be happier. So I think that's kind of funny that you don't really have conversations where everybody kind of like gets it. The media is saying, let's bomb Muslim countries, and then we'll take in all the refugees, and then we'll bomb more Muslim countries, and we'll take more refugees. It's called, I think, invade and invite model of neoconservatism and of globalism. So yeah, we're not going to have anybody calling in who supports that. But anyway, Southfield, Michigan, 30 more seconds. What do you got?
okay, well, it's just I know that times back then were different, but killing people and raping their wives and taking sex slaves, how can you not disavow that? And if you disavow that, you are no longer a Muslim. So I think it's real simple. these things cannot be accepted. How can you accept, taking sex slaves and chopping people's heads off that are no longer a threat to you?
Are you a pacifist, sir? Do you believe that violence is not allowed under any circumstance?
Violence in self-defense is fine. People being driven over by trucks is hardly self-defense.
Okay, so the drone attacks, all of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, those were in self-defense, and the hundreds of millions of Muslims, innocent civilians killed, or those were all in self-defense?
I don't disagree with you. I think the United States has done awful things, and we have no business in the Middle East. I agree with that.
Okay, so but you believe that there are situations where violence is justified. You have something called just war theory in your political ideology, right?
Well, I'm not sure what that term was just for, whatever. I don't
just war theory. The idea that
just war.
Yeah, that there is such a thing as a just war.
Yeah, it's my belief would be that those situations are very, very, very limited. And it's been a long time since the United States has been in anything that you could call a just war. And the world would be a hell of a lot better off if we weren't bombing other countries. Nevertheless, in Europe, based on what they believe their faith teaches them, there are thousands and thousands of young girls being raped. And that's because Muhammad. They're taking Muhammad's example. So I say, would you disavow that? You think raping these young girls in Europe is right?
I'm only familiar with the numbers in the UK because I was doing research for my debate with Tommy Robinson, which he backed out of. And if I'm not mistaken, the overwhelming majority of offenders in rape cases and child sexual exploitation cases are white males of the UK, and I'm sure you can extrapolate that into other European nations because it's just a numbers game. Now, is it okay that there are so many people from Muslim countries and Muslim ethnicities and backgrounds raping women? Absolutely not. This is not allowed in our religion. And if they believe that they're doing it from some sort of Islamic teaching, that's absolute nonsense. I would challenge you to say, I would challenge that point in that you believe that these people are doing it because Islam told them to do it, because that's not the case. Most of the time, these men are not religious Muslims. They are, drug traffickers. They're, into all kinds of, gang activity, and just rape is another aspect of their criminality.
Thank you for the call, sir. Thank you for the call, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We have another caller from Michigan. Warren, Michigan. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Okay, so I live in Michigan, obviously, and I am a Christian Iraqi. My parents came here in the 60s, and we visited Iraq back in 1989. Nabil, thank you for being here. And basically, from what I learned being there and, having Muslim friends here as I grew older, when we visited Iraq in the summer of 1989, I was 13 and my brother and sister were about a year and a half younger. And I noticed that basically, my older cousins and their friends were all like 18, 19, 20. And there was a lot of homosexuality going around. Basically, a couple of different people tried to molest me. A couple of people tried to molest my little brother.
I shouldn't laugh at that.
Family had to say, no, they're still from America. They're here visiting. Don't mess around like that. Now, is that something that's prevalent, kind of like in the Muslim culture, where because you don't have access to the girls at until marriage, that kind of like some funny business can be going down, and it's kind of like low key? or would you completely deny stuff like that happens in the Islamic culture?
No, there is a lot of underground homosexual activity that goes on in, particularly the Gulf countries, as far as I'm aware. So in all of these Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Iran, there's a lot of underground homosexual activity that goes on, but mostly it's behind closed doors. So it's not, open homosexuality.
Okay. And how do you feel about Jews? Do you believe that the Holocaust happened, or like about Zionism, basically?
As far as I'm aware, the Holocaust happened. I'm not somebody who knows too much about the Holocaust and the details about it, but the Holocaust happened.
Okay. I guess those are my only questions. Thank you for
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for the call. Yeah, it's a great point, which is that there is a lot of, like, the dancing boys of Afghanistan, and I'm always trying to figure out what is the difference. How can you separate what people do because of the religion, and then what can you do to separate it because of the culture? And I'm still making my mind up now and the inquiry. But we do know, like with Afghanistan, Bachi boys, I think they're called, but the dancing boys in Afghanistan, and I think the Taliban actually banned. There was something, I think, where the Taliban actually banned that, and then the Taliban were defeated, and then it was allowed again. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so the Taliban, they banned a lot of these degenerate cultural practices. They, in fact, almost eradicated opium production in that country just the year before. The year before the war in Afghanistan happened, they almost eradicated the opium production. And had they been given a little bit more time, they would have eradicated it completely. And once the Taliban were taken out of power, a lot of these vices came back. I mean, they had a lot of faults. They were extremely brutal regime, but they got rid of a lot of these vices in the society, and all of those vices have come back as a result.
And that's my point, is nobody is pro-Taliban, certainly not me. Nobody's pro-Taliban. The reason I brought that point up was just to explain that a lot of people just kind of see Arabs, oh, they must be Muslims, therefore whatever Arabs do has to be attributable to Islam. When within the Arab community, there's all kinds of different tribes. It's a very tribalistic culture. There's all kinds of disagreements. A lot of people in Jordan, maybe Palestinians, don't like the Saudis. People in Saudi Arabia, they don't like Qatar. There are people there who claim that Palestinians aren't even a people. They're not really a nation. There are people who claim that there was no such thing as a Jewish identity. It's complicated stuff, and it really does kind of bore me when people act like there's everybody in the Middle East are just Arabs, and that's the end of it. And all Arabs practice the same form of Islam. So therefore, whatever an Arab male does, it has to be attributed to some Bible verse in the Quran, and maybe it is, but maybe there's a cultural thing at work too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the push and pull factors in our societies relate to this specific issue. So the religion and culture argument, and a lot of the social problems that exist in Muslim societies are because of this religion versus culture discussion. Where you'll find a lot of Muslims in the West being a bit more progressive on this discussion, in that they're trying to sift through what are cultural practices and what are religious practices, because those cultural practices can't transfer to their culture in America or UK or France or whatever. Yeah,
especially with a lot of the kind of treatment of women. I view that as largely cultural. Cleveland, Texas, how you doing?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Sorry, I didn't know how to participate. Yeah, I'm calling from Texas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, basically the point I want to make here, that the problem that we have with immigration especially Islamic immigration, Muslim immigration, is in the numbers. Everything boils down to the numbers. Like, if you accept a few people from a particular culture, you have the resources to monitor them, you have the resources to help them, you have the resources to help them integrate into the society. But if you accept too many, as it's happening in Europe, you don't have the resources to do that. So what you end up is a situation where these people isolate themselves from the rest of the society, where they don't receive proper education, where they speak only their own language, where they hate the rest of the country and try to take it over because they don't feel that they are part of the country. And that's the problem. The problem is in the numbers, right? You cannot accept too many people that are different from your culture and expect that it's going to work out. So that's a myth, and that should be stopped. Basically, you destroy the society from inside by doing that. And that's the major point we have to understand, is in the numbers. We already have enough immigration from Islamic countries. We have to stop it till we figure out what's going on, as Trump said. And I think that's the major problem. We cannot continue to accept more and accept more when we have problems where we have segregation, where we have these people trying to impose their own culture, when we hear about Shariah law, or when you say we are against Shariah law, and they start protesting or getting upset, like in Texas is happening too. So in other words, we already have enough migrants from these countries. We have to pause or slow that and then figure out what's going on, and then we can continue. That's one point. And the second point, probably the most important point, is that when people come to a country and they don't integrate, they don't fit into the country, and they have voting power, then they have the power to change the government. And once they have the power to change the government, like in London, they voted for a Muslim mayor, for example, the country goes down the hill. Hello, you there?
Yep. Well, listen, I didn't want to interrupt you. You're conversing, so I'm not trying to interrupt you.
Oh, okay, yeah, just checking. So basically, I was saying that there were two problems. The first one is in the numbers, right? And the problem of getting too many people from these Islamic countries is that if you get too many, you don't have the resources to help them. You don't have the resources to deal with them. So we need to slow that. And the threat that they can pose, other than terrorism, other than opening mosques and trying to brainwash people, whatever, is that they can have voting power, and by voting power they can change the government. And if they multiply with no control, because they have like 10 children, 12 children, they will outbreed us, and at the end they will conquer us. And they can say, oh, no, Muslims are violent, no Muslims. Yeah, that's true. No, all Muslims are. But you don't need all Muslims to be like that in order to conquer the country. You just need enough of them to vote for an Islamic-driven law in order to conquer the country. And if you see that in every single country where Muslims become certain percentage, not even 50%, maybe it could be 40%, whatever, they can impose those laws because they join together with the liberals and they vote for the candidate. So you can, that's the problem. The problem is you cannot destroy a country from inside by allowing enough people who don't care about the country really, they care about their own agenda to take power.
Agreed. Thank you for your call, sir. Danger. Yeah, you agreed. Thank you. Demographic replacement. Appreciate your call, sir.
Sure. Thanks, Baba.
Yeah, I mean we touched on that earlier, right? Where people can like it or not, but there's demographic replacement. Demographic replacement will change laws and will change the country and change the culture.
I mean, if they don't like the breeding thing, they should just have more babies. I mean, what is the deal? What is the big deal here? And I mean, the other thing is, the guy has legitimate concerns. My thing is, why are your governments allowing so much immigration to take place? They know that they don't have the resources to integrate these people properly. Either they're one, stupid, or they're two, doing it maliciously.
All right, last caller is in Simi Valley, California. Simi Valley, California. How you doing?
Hi, Mike. Doing good. Just had a question for Nabil. It's something I've heard a lot of religious leaders, political leaders say over and over again, and just wondering what his take was, which is whether or not Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, the three big Abrahamic religions, still all worship the same God. You know, from some people's perspective, because they all have the same origin, it is the same God, whereas other people say that if you don't accept that Jesus was God in the flesh, how can it be the same God? So just curious what his take was on that issue.
Yeah, the idea of Abrahamic faiths is fake news. Muslims don't believe that. We believe Abraham was a Muslim, and all of the prophets and messengers before him and after him were all Muslims. They all preached Islamic monotheism. So the Jews who followed Moses correctly, they were actually quote-unquote Muslims. And the Christians who followed Jesus correctly, they were actually quote-unquote Muslims. So we don't believe in this concept of Abrahamic faiths. It is a convenient, I guess it's a politically correct term in order to facilitate interfaith discussions. I believe those discussions should happen honestly, because it is abhorrent to a Muslim to say that God Almighty had a son.
Okay, thank you for your call, sir. We got two more. You want to take two more calls?
Go for it, man.
All right, Columbus, Ohio, you're live.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. And then Jacksonville, Florida, you're next.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so we were technically done, but we got Columbus, Ohio, then Jacksonville, Florida. Columbus, go for it.
My question was about the whole issue with culture, Muslim culture, and Arab culture, and if Arab culture is being forced, kind of integrated with the religion, and what his views are on that.
Yeah, this is a good point. There are among Muslims the misconception that Arabic culture is more Islamic than other cultures. We're starting to see that change over the past decade or so, where Muslims, second and third generation, children of immigrants, they're more I guess American or British or French than the culture of their parents. So there is that discussion that's happening where what is really the difference between Islam and culture. But for what it's worth, South Arabian culture is not explicitly Islamic culture. Just by the fact that they've been Muslim for longer, there are more aspects of Islam in their cultures, but that doesn't mean that a Muslim man like me who's wearing a suit and tie is any less Islamic than another Muslim who's wearing robes and a turban.
Thank you for your call, sir.
I know that a lot of people are encouraged to take on Arab names sometimes, and do you think that's just kind of some cultural groups do that, but it's not part of the religion, or?
Yeah, so changing the name when you become a Muslim is not obligatory unless your name has a bad meaning. So you'll have a lot of converts to the religion that keep their names. My wife, for example, she's a convert. She's German, a white German. She converted to Islam. She kept her name. She didn't change her name.
Your wife's a white German? Oh man, yeah. I can't wait to read the comments on YouTube now. Holy shit.
Miscegenation.
Oh my God, YouTube's gonna go crazy when they hear that. Thank you for your call, sir.
Thank you.
All right, the final caller, Jacksonville, Florida. For those of you watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button. Like it even if you hate it, because we just got a guy. We had a conversation, man. We scream at each other enough. Give me a couple hours a week where we're not screaming at each other. There's plenty of time for that, and hopefully we can watch a debate between Nabil and other people. Right now we know Anybody now that wants to debate Nabil, you have your homework done. You now have Q&As, things to question about. So I think people, instead of whining at me, you should be very happy that if they think you're so full of shit and are evil and duplicitous, now they can have people debate you, and they have 2 hours of your question and answers in advance. So I don't know why people are upset. I think you should be happier. Last call, Jacksonville, Florida. Before I take it, hit the like button on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. You're live, Jacksonville.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi. I have a quick question, and I don't know if you answered it earlier. If you did, I apologize. But I was interested in knowing your explanation of what Taqiyya is, the, Taqiyya, whatever they are referring to as deception, lying in order to further an agenda that everyone keeps talking about. Is that a real thing, and where did it come from?
Yeah, so the concept of taqiyya is actually in the Quran. Just to describe it in an example, if Mike Cernovich had held a gun to my head and said, "You better renounce Islam right now, or I'm gonna blow your brains out." In that situation, I'm allowed to renounce my faith, while basically lie and renounce my faith, while still believing in Islam in my heart, in order to preserve, in order to save my life. That is the only context in which taqiyya is allowed. It's a life or death context, and it doesn't apply to 99.99% of interactions between Muslims and non-Muslims today.
Thank you for your call, miss. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so those of you who want to continue trolling Nabil, here, let me give you his Twitter account so that you can all continue trolling him, because you know what? We're all about that life. It is his Twitter handle, and I'll type it and paste it into the chat box. And if you guys want to debate him or challenge him to debate, whatever, man, I don't cry. NABELAZEEZDXB. That is quite a Twitter handle from a branding perspective. I would rethink that, man. So one more time, it's Nabil Aziz, NABELAZEEZDXB. Thanks for the conversation, man. You know, a lot of people are mad at me. A lot of people are mad at you. Some people are happy because they think you really made Islam look bad. So my perspective is that as long as we're talking to each other, we're not killing each other. Do you have anything else to say? Parting words.
Yeah, I just want people to have a little bit of intellectual humility. I remember a discussion that you had with Stefan Molyneux, where basically Molyneux was like, I've given up trying to figure out what's good and what's bad. And that is the sign of a reasonable mind. Things are a lot more complicated than you want them, like you would like them to be. It's not such a good idea to be very reductionist and try to simplify extremely complex geopolitical matters into some black and white scenario that you can just immediately decide on, have an opinion on, because you're just being intellectually lazy. So I just wish people would have a little bit more intellectual humility, and I believe that people like Mike Cernovich are doing a great job of facilitating conversations like this, because for all of the shit talking that goes on Twitter, it's when we actually sit down face to face and have a discussion where we can make progress.
Yeah, and my perspective too is I would rather talk to somebody first, and then if you have a debate later, then I know what that person's going to say, rather than say, okay, here's my 3 talking points and let me get that out. That's a kind of a different style. So, again, people are going to disagree. That's cool. A lot of people are going to accuse him of being a liar and whatever, man. So you can find him on Twitter. I'll give you that one more time. NABELAZEEZDXB. And I'll copy that. And I know from experience that, because my people troll him regularly and attack him and everything, you might not believe him, you might not agree with him, but he's not going to call the Twitter police on you because you call him a dirty mussy. Thanks again. Have a good day, man.
All right, bro. Thank you so much, bro. I really appreciate it.
Good night.